It's Christmas Eve in L.A.
California.
Is Daddy coming home with you?
Well, we'll see what Santa and Mommy can do, okay?
And New York cop John McClane has come to see his wife.
I missed you.
Instead, he's going to have to save her.
Sit down.
Within this skyscraper high above the city, 12 terrorists have declared war.
They're about to be taught a lesson in the real use of power.
They're as brilliant
Because I am interested in the $640 million in your vault.
as they are ruthless.
And I'm telling you, you're just going to have to kill me. Okay. We do it the hard way.
Now, the last thing McClane wants
Think, damn it, think.
is to be a hero.
Where's Holly? Hey, Tucker! Where?
But he doesn't have a choice.
What does he think he's doing?
Job.
They have already killed one hostage.
This channel is reserved for emergency calls only.
Lady, do I sound like I'm one of the pieces?
He's inside? Who is he?
That's what you're saying.
Who are you then? You are most troublesome for a security guard.
Yeah. Sorry, wrong guess, huh? Would you like to go for double jeopardy?
Do you really think you have a chance against us, Mr. Cowboy?
Yippee-ki-yay, mother. Just destroyed a building, and I am in charge of this situation. Well, I got some bad news for you. Come up here, that look like you're in charge of Jack. He is alone, he is tired, and he hasn't seen diddly squat from anybody down here.
Hey, pal, how you feeling?
All things being equal, I'd rather be in Philadelphia.
And you have it.
Only John can drive somebody that crazy.
He's an easy guy to like
Come out to the coast, we'll get together, have a few laughs.
and a hard man to kill. Bruce Willis, Die Hard.
Got invited to the Christmas party by mistake. Who knew?
Chama people, and welcome to our 157th episode of Gold Standard, the Oscars movie podcast, where we travel through time, reviewing the films that earned their gold statue, or standard if you will, and beyond. I am one of your co-hosts, DJ Nick, and as always, joining me at the Gold Standard Theatre are my two podcasting partners in crime. On one side, the professional nerd herself, Rachel Friend. Hey Rachel, how are you today?
I can't complain too much. No offense to Sergeant Al Powell, but as someone who is the child of two law enforcement previous law enforcement professionals, no, we do like donuts.
Very well said. And on the other, the Ghostwood girl, Zan Sprouse. Hey Zan, how's life treating you?
I'm good. My boss thinks I'm on my way to Vegas.
Very well played. I think everybody will have the quotes today because today, folks, we are reviewing a movie that Rachel selected, and that is Die Hard, of course, directed by John McTiernan. It was based on the 1979 novel Nothing Lasts Forever by Roderick Thorpe, while the screenplay was by Jeb Stewart and Stephen E. D'Souza, while the score was by Michael Kamen. An estimate put in today's money, adjusted for inflation, this movie cost $80 million to make and made $410 million at the box office. It premiered at the Avco Theatre on July the 12th of 1988 and was then released to the general public on July the 15th, 1988, and has a runtime of roughly 2 hours and 12 minutes. So, Rachel, starting with you, as you selected today's movie, what are your general thoughts and impressions on Die Hard?
I love this movie. It's I think the only reason I ever watched it in the first place was because of Alan Rickman. Once I discovered who he was, I had to watch like anything and everything I could get my hands on. I was vaguely aware of Bruce Willis and his time as an action star. But this isn't necessarily my type of movie in the grand scheme of things, but it's so damn fun. As much as I don't really care for Bruce Willis comparatively to some of his other leading men of the same time period, I will take him, over like Kevin Costner, who is cardboard, At least Bruce Willis can emote. Uh, so, um, and the thing is he wasn't an action star. He wasn't necessarily the person that they first considered for this role because when he was doing moonlighting, you know, he was more of a rom-com type leading man, not an action star. Um, but as it happened, he got cast as John McClane, and the rest is kind of history. The Die Hard franchise has however many in it that it does. Um, and of course, Bruce unfortunately is now retired. Has been forced to retire because of illness. Um, but it was just one of those kind of lightning in a bottle where you just got the right cast. Even they're not really anybody super famous. Like Bruce Willis, I mean, he was famous, but again, not as an action star. Alan Rickman was an up and comer. He didn't necessarily want to do this because he was afraid he'd get typecast as a villain. Kind of did, but in the best way possible. All the villains he's played have all been fantastic performances. Unlike some others that kind of get typecast as the villain and then just kind of cashing a paycheck. Yeah, so this was just one of those movies where it's like, it's not a summer blockbuster technically. It is set at Christmas. Of course, there's the ongoing argument, 40 something, almost 40 years later, whether it's a Christmas movie or not. I wholeheartedly think it considered a Christmas movie. It is one of my go-tos every season, regardless of what else we have going on during our Christmas, break, visiting family and all that. Christmas Eve, eventually we all just kind of go our separate ways. It's gotten to the point now where actually Chauncey and I and his parents will actually sit down and watch a Muppet Christmas Carol together. After I turned them onto it a couple of seasons ago. Because it used to be I would watch this and Muppet Christmas Carol by myself and they would watch whatever because they have their go-tos. Like I don't mind watching Home Alone every so often, National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation every so often, but they're not all necessarily my go-tos for the season. So now we'll sit down and watch Muppet Christmas Carol, and then I'm like, okay, you guys watch whatever. I'm gonna go watch Die Hard. And that's what we do. We just get a spread of snacks. We don't bother with a meal, a proper meal. We just do, whatever, whatever floats your boat. Of the snacks, that have been
Feel a candy
accumulated
bar from
in
the
the house.
newsstand.
Exactly. And I always have a brand new bottle of wine, and I usually drink one half during Muppet Christmas Carol, and the other half gets consumed during Die Hard. So at the end of the night, I'm feeling good. No problem falling asleep so Santa could come deliver presents. But yeah, it's got a good pace to it. Um, it's got action, but it's also funny. Bruce Willis has some great quips in here. This is a fantastic performance by Alan Rickman. Hans Gruber is up there as far as film villains. If you look at lists of like movie villains, he's up there in the top 10 with like Darth Vader. Yeah. Even though the man really doesn't actually do anything, like he threatens to shoot people, but other than
He shoots
Holly's
Takagi and he
boss,
shoots Ellis.
yeah, and one of those I think was justified actually. We'll get to that though. But it's like other than that, he's the lead head, he's the lead guy. he's the boss with all these henchmen, but he just carries such a presence that this guy's dangerous. It is, but you know, he also has some funny moments, Um, so it's yeah, I love this. I love this movie so much.
And I can clearly see why, and we'll definitely get into it. And it's interesting you mentioned that because this was John McTiernan's third film after coming off the success of Predator the year prior, also released during the summer period. And here we are with this one being out in July of '88. And Zan, what did you make of this one?
I love this movie. This is hands down my favorite Christmas movie. Every year I host Christmas, and the night before on Christmas Eve, Chris and I will usually do gifts, and then I will do food prep for Christmas Day. And, I have a top 5 list of 5 favorite Christmas movies. Die Hard's number 1. So I just go through my list of Christmas movies, and every Christmas Eve while I'm cooking, I watch Die Hard. So I'll be in the kitchen, I'll be up, mixing up a dip or something and be like, what the fuck do I sound like I'm ordering a pizza? Like I'll be quoting the whole movie throughout the time that I'm cooking. I absolutely love this movie. It is the gold standard to which all action movies are held now. And like you said, Nick, action movies started to gain some traction and some credibility in the late 80s, thanks very much in part to John McTiernan with, like you said, with Predator, and definitely with this one. And that's the thing, is that they kind of have a reputation for being just dumb explosion movies. But this one shows you that there can be a plot, there can be characters, there can be an intricate plot, there can be a double cross, and your villains can be not what they seem. And I love the fact that this movie is such a product of its time, with the fact that there was still an East Germany at the time, there was still a Cold War, and you could hide behind political ideology for your own personal gain. And people wouldn't necessarily notice right away. And that's exactly what happens in this movie. And it was a fascinating thing to see when it happened. I think we've talked before about the reaction at the time when Michael Keaton was cast as Batman. There was something similar with this when this came out. I was 12 when this came out, so I remember the phenomena that was Bruce Willis at the time. And Bruce Willis at the time, just like Rachel said, he had been on the TV show Moonlighting, which, if you have not seen it, it's somewhere. I don't remember who has it right now. Maybe it's Hulu. But it was a romantic comedy, he said, she said, breaking the fourth wall detective mystery show. It was him and Sybil Shepherd, and it was wonderful. And in true 80s format, being a 12-year-old, I was still a fan of Moonlighting, even though it was not necessarily appropriate for me to be watching Moonlighting. But we all loved it. We all loved Moonlighting. And his character, David Addison, was everywhere. Everyone was talking about him. Everybody was trying to quip like him. And, Bruce Willis, every time you saw Bruce Willis, you sort of saw David Addison. Even when Bruce Willis was doing wine cooler commercials, and he was the face and voice of Seagram's Golden Wine Coolers back in the day, it felt like you were watching David Addison. And when this movie came out, everybody was like, what the, because David Addison is very much a not in the face kind of a guy. And, his character on Moonlighting was using company funds to fund his own BMW, things like that. He's that kind of a 80s guy. He's like kind of a sleazy 80s guy, except it was network TV, so there was no cocaine. So everyone was sort of thinking like, oh, David Addison's an action star. And there are some shades of David Addison in this character, but it's different enough, because David Addison would never have a wife and kids and never have this, he plays by his own rules, but it's a different sort of a way. So it was a very, very different thing, and everybody loved it. And like I said, Bruce Willis was everywhere. I have Bruce Willis's album. Okay. So he was everywhere. And when he came out in this movie, it just really skyrocketed him to movie stardom. And that was not something that happened very much at the time. He was one of the first ones that went from super famous on television to being super famous in the movies. Because you had people that, like say like Christopher Reeve, who started out in a soap opera and then became Superman. But this was definitely a transition to superstardom. And that's in part to how well this cast works together, how well this script works. And I'll talk more about how this couldn't happen today, because first of all, you can't just cut the phone lines. You'd have to collect everybody's cell phone. Also, bearer bonds are illegal now for exactly this reason. Bearer bonds are what they're stealing in this movie, and bearer bonds are exactly what they sound like. Whoever is physically holding it owns the bearer bond. So if somebody steals a bearer bond from you, too bad, it's theirs now. So that's why they're illegal, because it's just too right for this kind of violence and espionage, essentially. So it's not something that you could see today. Also, there's a scene where, Powell walks out of the gas station, and I think gas is like 79 cents or something like that, and it makes me want to cry. But it's such a perfect representation of its time, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like you're watching something. It doesn't feel like a Saturday Night Fever, where it's not only a product of its time, but a fad. It's more of a product of its time and a commentary on not just the culture, but the political landscape. And it's very well written. The performances are wonderful. Everybody completely understands the assignment. And even Holly's character, when we talk about, often we talk about female characters are only there for the advancement of the male characters. Holly's already the advanced character. She's the most advanced character of this couple, of this marriage. And so she's there for not for the advancement of our protagonist. She's there for the downfall of our antagonist. And I love that switch of the flip of the switch on that one. And there's really so much more to this movie than what we expect of a dumb action movie, explosion movie. Because action movies really do have that reputation of a bunch of bros getting together and be like, yeah, let's blow some stuff up. But Die Hard is so much more than that. And like I said, action movies are measured to the standard now. And if it doesn't measure up, it's not going to do well. It's not going to have the audience. It's not going to have the reviews. It's not going to make the money. And we've seen that even with Die Hard sequels. The second one tried to do the exact same thing, but on a plane. Doesn't work that way. The third one kind of figured out how you would do something like this again. And you have to step it up when it comes to action movies with this. And then we started seeing action movies that really stepped it up, because, this is, in the next couple of years is when we got things like Terminator 2. So this really did, I think, set a standard for what we know an action movie can be, and what we know is a good movie that has action, rather than an action movie that happens to be good.
I totally agree. I definitely think this movie very much defined the genre. And like you said, Zan, I think very much ended up becoming the measuring stick when it came to action movies, or movies within this genre then came out. I will say there is something almost miraculous about how this film works, because on paper, it does sound simple, even familiar, a confined setting, a crisis, a race against time. Yet every time I think about this one, what stands out isn't the scale of the action, but the precision behind it. What I admire most is its sense of balance. It never feels desperate to impress. The spectacle is exciting, but it never overwhelms the story. The tension is relentless, but it never becomes exhausting. And as Rachel was saying, the humor arrives exactly when it's needed, not to undercut the danger, but to make the danger feel even more real. What I think gives this film its lasting power is that it understands vulnerability. The obstacles feel difficult because failure feels possible. The stakes aren't built on saving the world or preventing some abstract catastrophe. They're very immediate, they're very personal, and very tangible. And I think that intimacy makes every setback matter. I also appreciated how efficiently the film tells its story. Almost nothing feels wasted. Small details introduced early gain significance later. kind of like when we talked about My Cousin Vinny, different genre, but they were doing the same thing here. And every development seems to emerge naturally from what came before. It's, I think, that kind of craftsmanship that can go unnoticed because it feels effortless. And then there's the atmosphere. The setting becomes definitely more than the backdrop. It feels very much like a maze or a battleground, and at times almost a character in itself. And by the end, you know every corner of it because the film has used the space so intelligently. What I think ultimately impresses me about this film is that it never confuses loudness with excitement. You know, it understands that suspense comes from investment and not volume. You know, decades later, it remains engaging, I think, not because it was bigger than everything around it, but because it was sharper. It's an action film built with the discipline of a thriller, and I think the confidence of a story that knows exactly what it wants to be. And as we've noticed, you know, more often than not, when a movie knows what it wants to be, it tends to be successful. So let's get to our characters on the board, starting with our hero and his wife. We have the aforementioned Bruce Willis as John McClane and Bonnie Bedelia as Holly Gennaro McClane. So Zan, starting with you, what did you think of John and Holly?
I think the writing between John and Holly, the married couple, is so well done and so succinct and tells so much of the story that you need to understand without taking too long, without dragging it on or anything like that. We know we have a guy who's in New York, he's flying to California to see his family, and then you have all the exposition with him and Argyle in the car. Well, why is your wife here? That's a long story, whatever. She had a good job opportunity. She took it. Oh, you thought she'd come back crawling to you, huh? Yeah, I said, you're very fast, Argyle. And he's admitting that he had these preconceived notions that were completely incorrect. And then when we see them together, you know, that moment where she sees him and immediately softens and, John, I was hoping you made that flight. And they, you know, she kisses him just kind of timidly because, you know, she's in front of people and they haven't seen each other in 6 months. And you're like, what is it with this couple that are separated but still kind of like each other? Like, what is going on here? And even with the moment, okay, first of all, can I just say how much I hate that guy who, when McClane first comes to Nakatomi Plaza and he says he's looking for Holly McClane, and then he does the whole thing of looking at her name in the computer, and then he tries Holly Gennaro and finds out that she's going by her maiden name, and he's like, oh, what the hell? And then he mentions the name, and he's like, oh yeah, they're the last in the building. You couldn't have just told me that? You made me type that into the computer? I hate that guy. He didn't have to die on Christmas Eve, but I still hate that guy. They're having that argument where they go into her office and he's talking to her like he's still the protective husband and she's the wife that needs protection, even from Ellis. You know, when he's, you know, when she's saying, you got to forgive Ellis, you know, he gets depressed this time of year. You know, he thought he was God's gift. And, you know, his first thought is he's got his eye on you because that's what he's thinking. And this is his wife and a guy is looking at his wife. And she says, that's okay. I have my eye on his private bathroom. She's very obviously a go-getter. She is success-driven. She is, as Takagi says, she's tough as nails and built for this business. Yet she's still a wonderful mom when you see her on the phone. You know, hello, Lucy McClane. Well, let's see what Santa and Mommy can do. You know, you can tell that she's definitely present for her children and essentially being a single mom with a husband who is 3,000 miles away. So already you sort of feel for Holly because you know that John is very steeped in old school misogynist gender roles. And probably my favorite line outside of the obvious best line of the movie is when they're having their argument and he's trying to blame her for taking this job and without having any, you know, this, she's like, it's your Japanese company. You are married, Holly. You're married to me. And you didn't give a thought about what this would do to our marriage. And she says, this didn't do anything but change your perception of what our marriage should be. And he tries to defend himself. And she says, I know exactly what your idea of our marriage should be. And her delivery of that line is so perfect that you know exactly what their marriage is like. That he probably liked that she was sort of independent and had her own thing and wasn't a gold digger, all that stupid crap that we hear about misogyny in relationships. And they probably both wanted kids, and, she wanted more than he knew how to be married to. And she said, this isn't because I don't love you. This is because I can't be hindered by your perception of how marriages should be. And she says, I'm taking the kids to California and we are doing what I'm doing. You can come with us if you want to. And him, in his male-centric pigheadedness, stayed in New York, assuming that she would maybe miss him or miss family life or think it's this success is too much and she does just want to stay, whatever. She completely does her thing that she tried to include him in and he refused to be a part of. So everything about this couple, but you can tell by the way that they argue that there is a passion for each other there, that they are extremely connected with each other. He's there because he's not, he's even going to stay, with Cappy, who retired to Pomona, and they go through that little song and dance of like, oh, you'd be in the car half the time. I got a spare bedroom. And it is the spare bedroom. She's not saying, come sleep in the marital bed with me again. Stay in the spare bedroom so we can have Christmas with our kids. This is the first Christmas that they've had since she moved to California. So this is all new to them. But you can tell by the way that they argue and the way they interact with each other that there is still a love there. He is proud of her, but that's a new feeling to him. He doesn't know how to be proud of a woman who is successful in a way that he doesn't understand. He's a cop. He's not an executive. So not only does he not understand the success of climbing the corporate ladder, he also doesn't understand a woman who wants that kind of success. That's not part of his paradigm. And Holly is teaching him that, and he's grudgingly learning, but he's a typical man of his generation who is not particularly emotionally examined. And so he has to go through a heck of a lot to figure this one out. And I think she also has to go through a lot to be able to reconcile the two parts of her personality. Because yes, she is tough as nails, built for this business, a great executive. And yes, it's a Japanese company, but she is still married with a family. She is still married with 2 kids. She has a husband. And at the end of the day, all of those things are important, and we do have our, we have our, A Star is Born moment where he's figured it out, that she is a different type of woman than he's ever seen before. And he introduces her to Al as his wife, Holly Gennaro. And she says, Holly McLean, because screw it. Screw other people's mores, whatever. Her kids are named McLean. She's married to John McLean. They're a family, and that is important also. So it's kind of like the end of Grease, where they both kind of find importance in both of their worlds. And like I said, it's kind of like a Star is Born ending, but it's like with that, him giving her name and her giving his name, they both are sort of acknowledging the difference in what their marriage should be. Essentially, they're both realizing that they both have a different idea of what their marriage should be, and that is evolving for both of them. And that's one of the good parts about the fact that we establish them as a couple, because John's only there because of her. And even when he tells Bill Clay, aka Hans Gruber with an American accent, that he got invited to the party by mistake, he goes to meet his wife, and there just happens to be a party there. He's not there for a party. He's there to meet her, essentially. That they're also in a crisis, and they get separated. And when you hear gunshots, everybody freaks out at first, and Holly looks for John. That's what she's doing. She's like, where is he? Like, what's going on? Because she knows that he is a cop, and now this is his comfort zone. This type of crisis is his kind of comfort zone. And so there's there's definitely a connection between the two of them. And even even at the very end where he's just filthy and just, I'm coming, honey, because he's doing this not only to survive, but to make sure Holly survives as well. And we have those moments throughout this whole ordeal where you can see Holly doing what she does best, with Ellis might be the one who negotiates $1 million deals for breakfast, but Holly is the one who's tough as nails. She's the one that can come in and talk to Hans Gruber and say things to him like, you put me in charge when you murdered my boss. Like, she is not pulling any punches with him. And she's also wanting to make sure that she kind of keeps the fact that the guy that there's the fly in the ointment, Hans, that she doesn't really reveal that they know each other because she knows that that'll be used as leverage. And exactly what would happen if he finds out about that is what happens when he finds out about that. So we get to see Holly do her thing with our, I'm going to call them terrorists, even though we know they're just robbers. We know they're just thieves. They are exceptional thieves. And since they are moving up to kidnapping, we should be more polite. So maybe I should just call them exceptional thieves. But then we also see John not just trying to deal with our exceptional thieves. John is trying to survive, because if he had just stayed in the room with everybody and, like they go through all the rooms and they take the couple that's making out and everything. If he had just stayed in the room with everybody and done what they said, he would have blown up on the roof just like everybody else would have blown up on the roof. Because that's the part that we think throughout this, that they say even Hans Gruber says, we have no wish for further loss of life. Bullshit. They are going to blow everybody up when they blow up the building. And so he's trying to survive. And remember, John McClane was cleaning up after his plane trip. He doesn't have shoes on. He doesn't have clothes on. He barely grabbed his gun, and that's the cop in him, where he's going to hide, grabs a gun rather than shoes. So, we see him just trying to, at least, even if he can't assume control of the situation, assume control of his survival and enlist the help he needs to help, because he can't do anything. There's a ton of guys there. I forget how many guys they start out with, but he definitely reduces the number of guys. And he does what he can to get in contact with Al and all of that. But again, no shoes. He's trying to, no shoes, barely any clothes. He's trying to survive. The one part of this movie I can't watch is him pulling the glass out of his feet. That, I just, if you've ever gotten glass embedded in your feet, that scene triggers your PTSD. It's really terrible. But John McClane, like I said, we've established him as this sort of traditional New York cop and all of the stereotypes that implies. But there's more conflict in his life. And now we just have more conflict in his life. He's here. All he wants to do is see his kids. It is Christmas Eve. And now he has to deal with this. And he's dealing with it in the only way he knows how. And as, I can't remember Carl's brother's name. As he says, you won't hurt me. You're a policeman. There are rules for policemen. And he says, yeah, that's what my captain keeps telling me. I don't think he intended to break his neck, but I do think he intended to neutralize him. And, as he's going along, trying to he's just basically trying to reduce the danger of these guys and figure out what they want. He's trying to just stop them from doing whatever they're doing by, sending plastic explosive down the elevator or creating a fire alarm or calling the police or what have you. He's just trying to get word out that, like, hey, they have cut the phone lines. It's Christmas Eve. Who's calling Nakatomi Plaza on Christmas Eve at like 8 p.m.? Nobody needs to do business at that time. So, and everybody's expecting these executives to maybe be at a Christmas party. Even Dwayne Robbins says, I don't know, some stockbroker got depressed when he saw Marco get pushed out of the window. So, John is going through this, and, he is quipping, he's the wonderful, come out to the coast, we'll get together, we'll have a few laughs. And I know how a TV dinner feels. And, I love the, no more table. Next time you have a chance to kill someone, don't hesitate. Thanks for the advice, as he shoots him up through the table. But he's also saying things like every time he does something. One of my favorite scenes in this is where he goes out the window on the fire hose and he's wrapping himself up and tying up the fire hose. He's like, John, what the fuck are you doing? Like he is just winging this. He has no idea what he's doing. And then he's like, God, if you get me out of this, I promise I'll never go up in a tall building again for as long as I live. And I love the reaction shot of Bruce Willis when he's able to get that untied. And he finally backs away from the window, and you can tell he's about ready to pee himself. You can tell he's afraid, and this is completely new to him, and he's needing to learn who these guys are. He's writing their names down on his arm. He's learning the lay of the building, learning what his resources are, and trying to use their resources against them by using their walkie-talkies and their explosives and their foreign cigarettes and everything. And even when he comes across Hans Gruber, like I was saying, Hans does kill people, and he was going to kill John McClane if McClane had given him a gun with bullets in it. He's not, he is not stupid. He may be unprepared for some things in this situation that he's never dealt with before, but he's not stupid. Even when he figures things out, like, why are you on the roof, Hans? What were you doing up there? And he goes up there and he sees all of the explosives, and he's like, this is a double cross. You have to back up. And even when he's warning the LAPD, who thinks they know what they're doing, they think they know what they're doing. He's saying, I don't care what you think, Dwayne. I'm in here. I know what these guys are doing. You have to listen to me. And he is doing his best to get people to believe him for as little as he can talk about it. He can't say his name. He can't give away his position, anything like that. So you can tell that he's really good at what he does when it comes to being on flying by the seat of his pants. But at the end of the day, he's trying to survive. And then while he's trying to survive, he realizes that he needs to save like 30 people. This whole party is going to die if they go up on the roof and go into helicopters. And, that's why he comes up on the roof and he starts firing at the FBI, because, he's like, I will take this risk if it means people will go back downstairs and get off of this roof. So for as many issues as John McClane has, being I don't play by the rules, I'm the man of the house, all of this sort of misogynist, misplaced masculinity bullshit that he has going on, he's a good person, and even when you have that moment where he's starting to get scared and he talks to Powell and he's like, I'm getting a bad feeling up here, and I need you to get a message to my wife. I can't tell you how, but then you'll know how. And he's, she's heard me say I love you 1,000 times, but she's never heard me say I'm sorry. I need you to tell her that John says he's sorry. He's starting to figure out the kind of emotional awareness that he needs to have as a person and as a husband when he's going through this. He's learning these lessons, and he really grows I think he really grows as a person throughout this whole thing. And as much as I find the relationship between him and Holly very, very interesting, the way they interact with each other and the way we learn about their marriage and the way we know so much about them from just a couple of lines. His relationship with Powell, I think, is fantastic. The way they work together, the way Powell figures out who he is, and the way that they just wind up trusting each other, because at the end of the day, they're both cops and they're both in this to save lives, essentially. These are good people. Sergeant Al Powell is, an expectant dad just trying to go home and gets a body on his car. John McClane does throw a dead body on his car, but it's a means to an end. There are a lot of things that he does that seem kind of out there, but how else are you going to get somebody's attention that is not listening to you? And you're like, there are hostages and there are people dying and you need to come back. Everything John McClane does, I don't think he does really for any sort of gratuitous reason, aside from, blowing a kiss to the naked pictures posted up in the hallways. I don't think he does anything that's particularly gratuitous, unlike, Hans Gruber and the other exceptional thieves. He has the capacity to be a very decent person. And I think that works for us with our hero, because I think it's easier to relate to a hero that it's easier to root for a hero that you can relate to as a human. And you can sort of see, and even as a woman watching this movie, you can look at this movie on a very surface level and think that it's just nothing but explosions and machismo and misogyny and macho-ness and everything, but there's so much more there. He is learning. He's figuring this out. And for a guy of his generation in 1988, he's figuring out a hell of a lot in this very tense, very, very dangerous situation. And, we have this. I'll talk about it now so we can talk about other things at the ending. There's different ways you can look at the end of this movie, how Hans Gruber dies and how that happens. Because John shoots him, he's got Holly as a hostage, and he won't let go of her when he falls out of the window. And what keeps him from falling is not just holding Holly, but it's holding onto her watch. And we talked about this watch at the beginning when Ellis is like, show him the watch. It's just a little token of appreciation. And she's like, later, okay? Because that's not the point of what they want to talk about. And the reason Hans falls, which by the way, they did not tell Alan Rickman they were going to drop him from that amount of distance. So that is 100% real reaction from Alan Rickman. When Hans falls, it's because John takes Holly's watch off of her, and the watch falls with Hans. And you can sort of look at that as kind of Holly, John taking off the shackles of Holly's executive life or something. But I think it's very obvious that Holly knows that the watch is not what the job is about, that it's a token of appreciation, but that's all it is it's a token. And whether she has the watch or not, Holly is still made for the business. Holly is going to persevere in her career, whether she has that watch or not. And I think they both realize that it's not about how things look from the outside. It's about what really matters. And what really matters is you have to let go of perceptions in order to survive. And the perception that you're doing this for a reward, you've got to get rid of that. And if you get rid of that, you can let go of all the other bullshit. And by letting go of that watch, that's how Hans dies. Hans would have taken her with him if he hadn't let go of that watch. And I've taken a lot of time thinking about that scene because I think it says a lot more about the whole process than it does about Holly losing something important to her. Because the job's important to her, the watch isn't. And if the watch were important to her, she would have listened to Ellis and shown John the watch. She would have cared more about it. And because she doesn't, I think it says a lot about Holly and John both, that this is a marriage not about, like I said, not about the outward appearances of it. She's not doing this job for the show. She can make the money to buy whatever watch she wants to. She's not doing this for the 80s reason of doing it, whereas I think Ellis might be. And I do like that ending, that he's not saving her from Hans necessarily. He kind of is, but they're both trying to pull back from Hans and make sure Hans drops. Like he is technically saving her, but not in the traditional way. It's very, very tense because once we shoot Hans, we think that's going to be fine, but it's not. He still has her. And it's not bullets that are now the threat. It's gravity that's the threat. And the fact that he at least is paying attention to the fact that she has this watch, and it is a throwback to earlier in the movie. But, after he pulls her back, they both embrace. They both embrace, and you can tell that they're just happy that the other one's okay. And I love the scene where she's smiling when Carl comes in and destroys the bar with the butt of his gun. And she just is smiling and says, he's still alive. And, her assistant is like, what? It's like, only John can drive somebody that crazy. She's just happy that he's okay. And at the end of the movie, they are both just so happy that the other one's okay. It's not about who saved who or what happened or whatever. They're just both there together and everything's going to be okay because they tried to survive together. And we see so much of John in this movie, so much more we see of John than Holly, but that's another interesting thing about their marriage is that they're still very much on each other's minds and very much trying to be a partnership in the best way that they know how. And it makes a good point about marriage. You have to constantly learn about what it means to be in the partnership that is your marriage. And they learned a lot this Christmas Eve. And so I like these characters, and I'm rooting for John to keep learning, and I'm rooting for them to be a family. It doesn't necessarily pan out that way in the sequels, but I like how they work together. I like how they are together, and I understand because when you think about Holly the executive and John the cop that's doing all this stuff, you might think to yourself, how the hell did they get together in the first place? I think throughout the movie you completely figure out how they became a couple in the first place, and you root for them, and you're happy that they're both safe because we know that there's a ton of people left over waiting to be rescued. We know there's $600 million in bearer bonds that is just falling from the sky. But what we're focused on is John and Holly hugging each other and being safe together. And so they really are the core of this story.
They 100% are. And Rachel, what are your thoughts on the McClanes?
So what's interesting with these two is you kind of have to put it in the context of the way that men and women were portrayed stereotypically in movies and television this time period. In the 80s, we had started seeing more women go into the workplace and do something beyond just being a secretary or something. We got Working Girl and TV shows, eventually like, women being successful in their own right. Obviously, Mary Tyler Moore did that prior to this, but you've got things like Designing Women, where all the ladies are working in a business for themselves, things like that, and the men are the they're supposed to be the breadwinner, the person to protect the family and make the living. And you still got people that this is very much in the time period of Reagan and the try to steer at least the United States back to the more quote unquote traditional family dynamics, the more nuclear family.
Fucking Reagan.
Exactly. Um, so you've got Holly, she's the Brit, she is probably, I almost guarantee, she is making a fuck ton more money than John is as a cop in New York. even, even if he was working, 80-hour weeks, it's a more blue collar job, and therefore it's not, you don't do that kind of job for the money. And the so when you've got somebody like Holly who has left, essentially broken up, air quotes, broken up their family by moving clear to the other side of the country, and has this job where she is making a lot of money, moving up the ranks, making a name for herself, getting recognition. She is either, she may not on a conscious level be aware, but she is kind of sticking it to the stereotype. It's like, this is the 80s now, and women can work and women can be successful, and we can make more money than our husbands, and it's not the end of the world. But John has more stereotypical traditional ideals of what a marriage should be like. He should be the hardworking husband, she should stay home with the kids, and everybody lives happily ever after. So when they find themselves in this situation where John does find himself in a position where he has to be the quote unquote man. Um, it's not because he does it to the best of his ability, but it's not because he happens to be one of the non-white collar men in the building. He's also a cop. He's trained for something like this. Maybe not to the scale, but he's got, some the training. He's been trained on how to use a gun and how to, to observe and take in pertinent information and uh you know, uh, some of the stuff that he does, thinking on your feet. But at the same time, he is not, as I was saying before, Bruce Willis up to this point was not a action star, but in his kind of first go of being, this action hero, he's not the completely indestructible, equalizer bunny that keeps going and going. He gets tired, he gets dirty, he gets injured, he's alone. Yes, he's got some communication with the outside world, but it's limited because he can't, because the bad guys are using the same channels. Everybody, as he tells Al, we're on a party line, man. And so he has to be very careful about how he communicates. And he does have those moments where he breaks down. Even almost immediately when he and Holly are having their bicker in the bathroom and she leaves, almost as soon as he's out the door, he's kicking himself, being like, John, what the fuck why did you say those things? Yeah. You putting your foot in your mouth. Like, you literally just got here. Yeah. But he's like, he's contradictory and almost for the sake of being contradictory. Like, nobody's going to think less of him because his wife is this big corporate executive. Some of the guys back at the force, they may rib him, but at the end of the day, he's got a wife who loves him and 2 kids, and that's a hell of a lot more than some people could ask for. But then you see Holly, once everything starts to, once the terrorists show up, she is no wilting flower either. Yeah, she may be a mom, but then she may be a corporate executive, but she's also a human being and probably has picked up a thing or two from being married to John, just living with a cop. But you have to imagine that she has to have a certain personality and a certain set of skills to be as successful as she's been in the corporate world. I mean, do we even know what the Nakatomi Corporation does? Not necessarily. My guess is they do a lot of things, honestly. It's probably it's probably real estate development. It's probably a number of different businesses or industries that they're in. It's just this bigger Nakatomi Corporation, that she worked for. So, when shit hits the fan, yes, she's worried, but she doesn't let panic take over. She does her best to, comfort those around her while also making sure that she's not doing anything to tick off anyone with a gun. Uh, and she steps up. Once her boss is gone, she is it's a great line, but it's also the truth when she tells Han, he's like, "Who put you in charge?" She's like, "You did when you killed my boss." It's just matter of fact about it, but she's very smart about it. She's like, "Yes, we understand we're your hostages. There's no negotiating." She understands that there's no negotiating their release or anything, but what she can do is try to make it as less scary for her coworkers as possible. And that's doing things like making sure that the pregnant employee has something more comfortable to sit on. Oh yeah, you got all these people that have been drinking champagne for how many hours? People are gonna have to pee. And well, the dudes could probably just whip it out and go in the water feature right there in the middle of the lobby. You probably don't want that. Um, so I mean she's very smart and very level-headed about things. Um, and that makes her great at her job, and I think it also makes her a great mom as well. Um, and uh you could also see why they butt heads. Not just like the misogynistic like ideals that maybe John has in his head. But just they are both they're both extremely smart and very very firm in their opinions and their beliefs, and sometimes that comes to a head and that causes conflict. Um, but if they can just talk instead of letting their emotions get the best of them, they're going to need some serious therapy after this is over. Uh, Regardless. Um, but you can see why, in general, why they probably fell for each other in the first place and why they've stayed together as long as they've had, and uh with their kids, and even with her with moving to the West Coast and everything. um if John really believed what he believed, he probably would have made a much bigger deal about her moving and taking the kids, and it probably wouldn't be this, oh, it's been 6 months. um Him talking with Argyle, it could have been, oh, she's been out here 6 months, but once one weekend a month the kids fly home to visit me, and then once a week, or whatever. Yeah, they could have made it way more complicated uh to make John comfortable with the situation, but they didn't. They did what was best for Holly and the kids as far as not completely uprooting their entire life. Which I think it then in itself shows that, some of the stuff that John says early on in the movie, he doesn't really believe it. I think he's just knee jerk blue collar cops, probably spends a lot of time with guys who probably actually do believe that shit. Uh, and he's just regurgitating the stuff that he hears the other guys say when I don't think he actually really believes it to the same extent. It probably comes more out of a place of he misses his wife and he misses his kids. He works probably really strange long hours as a cop, and to come home to a place that's empty is probably very disheartening. Yeah. No one to come home to and ask him how his day was, if he's got a tough case, to let him vent or whatever, or if his boss is being a jackass or something, there's no one for him to you know bemoan about it and have a sympathetic ear listen. His kids aren't there for him to play with and blow off some steam, play catch with his son or whatever. Um, you know, uh, so I think that's where a lot of his anger and frustration early on in the movie comes from. And it's a bit cliche that it takes something like this to him for him to kind of get his head completely out of his ass and realize, you've got something really good, John. It may not be the stereotypical wife and two kids, white picket fence, house in the suburbs, leave it to beaver type, but you've got a good thing going on. But it takes something like this for him to like completely get his head out of his ass and make him realize that. And that's a bit cliche, but they don't linger on it too long that it makes you be like, ugh, to turn into some sort of sappy moment. It's John just like, Al ends up cutting him off before it really gets there. Al's like, no, you can tell her yourself, you dumbass, you're gonna get out of this and you're gonna tell her yourself. And that kind of cuts the moment before it gets too sappy and too sad, and we move on.
We most certainly do. And, great points there, Rachel. And to piggyback off, some of the points that you made, I do think that John is interesting because he feels like an ordinary person forced into extraordinary circumstances, but not in the simplistic sense that he's completely average. He is a capable police officer, resourceful, stubborn, and courageous. But I think what makes him stand out is the film never lets those qualities turn him into a mythic figure. As you were saying, he's vulnerable in ways many action heroes are not. He gets tired, he gets hurt, he gets frustrated, he makes mistakes. There are moments where fear, doubt, and pain are very visible on his face. And the audience isn't just watching him overcome obstacles, they're watching him endure them. And I think that distinction matters. One aspect I particularly like, as you guys were alluding to earlier, is his sense of humor. It's not the polished confidence of someone who always has control of the situation. I think often his jokes feel like a coping mechanism, a way of managing stress and fear. The wisecracks make him more human because they don't erase the danger around him. If anything, they emphasize it. And he's also deeply stubborn. Sometimes that stubbornness is admirable. Sometimes it's part of what created problems in his personal life. And I think the film presents it as both a strength and a flaw. He refuses to quit when quitting might be safer, but he's also the kind of person who struggles to bend or adapt when circumstances change, as Zan was pointing out. And that complexity keeps him from feeling one-dimensional. What I do find most compelling is that his heroism feels reactive rather than aspirational. He doesn't seem driven by a grand desire to become a hero or save the day. He responds because he sees a problem in front of him and can't bring himself to ignore it. There is very much, therefore, a sense of obligation to him. Once he realizes what's happening, walking away isn't really an option in his mind. And I think the character also benefits from self-awareness. Beneath the sarcasm and the toughness, there are moments where he reflects on his own failures and regrets. And I think those scenes reveal a man who knows he isn't perfect. And that willingness to acknowledge weakness gives him emotional depth that many action protagonists sorely lack. I think also in a broader sense, John became influential, the character of John McClane became influential because he represented a shift in action heroes. Before him, many leading men in the genre were portrayed as nearly unstoppable. You think of the Schwarzeneggers, the Stallones of the world, even the Van Dammes. And John, he bleeds, he limps, he panics and improvises, and he wins not because he's invincible, but because he's persistent. And every victory feels earned. And by the end of the film, what I remember most isn't his toughness, it's his resilience. Toughness suggests someone who can't be broken. Resilience, I think, suggests someone who keeps going despite being battered and exhausted and afraid. That's what makes him memorable, at least to me. Whereas Holly, some folks often remember her as the wife in danger, but I think that description misses what makes her effective as a character. What I think stands out immediately, as you guys were also mentioning, is her self-possession. She's not written as someone who exists solely in relation to John. Before the crisis even begins, she has her own career, her own identity, and a clear sense of who she is. The tension in their marriage partly comes from the fact that she has built a successful life independently, and she's unwilling to diminish that to accommodate someone else's expectations. And she's also remarkably composed under pressure. While many people around her panic, she spends much of the film assessing situations and making the practical decisions and maintaining her dignity. The story, I think, repeatedly shows that she can think clearly even when surrounded by chaos. And that calmness becomes one of her defining traits. And I also appreciate that she possesses a quiet kind of courage. John displays courage through action and confrontation. Holly's courage is different. It's expressed through endurance and restraint and a refusal to be intimidated. She doesn't have the same opportunities to affect events physically, but when she does act, she shows considerable strength of character. And I think there's also a maturity to her that contrasts with John's impulsiveness. John often operates on instinct and emotion. Holly tends to appear more measured and controlled. And their relationship becomes more interesting because neither personality is inherently better. They complement each other while also creating friction. I think one of the most revealing things about her is that she doesn't seem impressed by bluster or authority for its own sake. She responds to competence, integrity, and genuine concern. And she can be warm and caring, but she also has a backbone. And when confronted by people trying to dominate or manipulate her, she pushes back in whatever ways are available to her. And I think what keeps Holly from feeling like a mere symbol of domestic reconciliation is that the film allows her to maintain her, her independence throughout. The emotional resolution doesn't require her to become a different person. Instead, it suggests that the relationship works best when both people recognize each other's value and autonomy. And in some ways, she is the emotional anchor of the story. John is constantly moving and reacting and improvising and surviving. Holly remains comparatively steady. She represents the life he's trying to preserve, like you guys were saying, but she's also a reminder of what he has to learn. The film isn't simply about him getting back to her. It's also about him coming to understand her more fully. And that's why I think she holds up better than many comparable characters from action films of that era. She's not defined by helplessness. She's defined by competence and dignity and unwillingness to surrender her sense of self, even under immense pressure. Excuse me. And their relationship is at the center of the film, is one of the reasons it endures beyond its action sequences. John comes across as stubborn and flawed and often emotionally clumsy. He isn't presented as an ideal husband. Much of the tension between him and Holly exists because both have pursued their lives in ways that created distance between them, and he struggles to adapt to changes he didn't expect. What makes him compelling, I think, is that the film allows him to recognize some of his own shortcomings rather than treating him as unquestionably right. And what I find interesting is the film doesn't portray their conflict as a simple case of one person being right and the other being wrong. Their marriage feels strained by career ambitions, pride, communication failures, and physical separation. Those are recognizable problems rather than melodramatic ones. And the crisis forces them to confront what they still mean to each other, as Zan was saying, but it doesn't erase the reasons they drifted apart in the first place. And in many action films, the relationship exists merely to provide emotional motivation. Here, the relationship feels more like a parallel story. The action plot is about surviving a siege, while the emotional plot is about two people rediscovering respect and affection after a period of estrangement. And the fact that both stories reach their resolution at the same time is part of what makes the ending satisfying. So my overall view is that they're not memorable because they're a perfect couple. They're memorable because they feel imperfect and frustrated and human. The movie's action is exciting, but yes, the relationship gives it a surprising amount of emotional weight. And I definitely commend, of course, both our actors for doing a splendid job with these characters. And so let's get to some essential allies to John in this film. We have Reginald VelJohnson as Al Powell and Devereaux White as Argyle. So, Rachel, what did you make of Al and Argyle?
Argyle is, in first introduction, it seems like he's just going to be like, oh, he's just one of those characters that gives us an opportunity to do some world building, some exposition. Them sitting in the limo and Argyle pestering him with questions about his personal life and everything. And then after that, it's all like, he's like, oh, I'm going to wait for you, give me a call if you need a ride, whatever. And you kind of think that's it. And it was an opportunity to quick cutaway to something a bit funnier. You know, in between all the shooting and the explosions and everything, there's Argyle with the radio turned way up, talking on the phone to, his honeys or whatever. Um, and completely oblivious to what is happening until the very end, where he gets to kind of save the day, in his own way. So, it's kind of, so Chekhov's gun is Argyle's limo, I guess. So, which I think is great. It's one of those things that's introduced at the beginning of the movie, and it's like, oh, once the action starts, we're not going to need him for anything. What purpose is he going to serve? Well, he ends up serving a big purpose. And it's just he's just great because he's just like he's so young. He's not you know because of the age difference, he's not carrying all that weight of the world. I've been working 5 bazillion hours just trying to make a living, bitterness, weight that adults seem to carry after a while. He's just very casual and carefree. It's like, hey, it's Christmas, man. We got California, the weather's great, you're gonna get to see your wife and your kids, you should be happy. And being the first, being the one to kind of say it out loud, that's like, man, all things considered, it sounds like you get, it's pretty sweet. You should be happy. But it's not till later that John finally comes to that realization on his own. But Argyle gets to be an asset, inadvertently and unexpectedly. And even after all of that, he's all like, if this is how you celebrate Christmas, I can't wait to see how you celebrate New Year's. So funny. And Al obviously plays a much bigger role. If you go online, easy enough for you to find it. There is a fan theory out there that all the cops that Reginald VelJohnson plays, between Al, his short it's a short scene, but he plays a cop in Ghostbusters, and then playing Winslow on Family Matters, that they're actually all the same person. It's just he's gone through stuff, and now he's like, by the time he gets to Family Matters, like he's on like the DL as far as like being a cop after all these more high profile things he's been involved in. like the police officers union of the country or something is like, dude, you need to just like chill. Here's some suburbs for you to go live in and work in. Al brings in a fellow cop for John to bounce off of and to talk to. And they come from different walks of life, but there is something about being a cop that kind of connects them all. It takes a very specific person to be a police officer, and even if you work in different areas, there's a kinship there. um and he Al is able to pick up on what John can't say and gets it, but also because he gets it, he also understands John's frustrations when the rest of the authorities don't want to listen to either of them, even though Al is there kind of to be a conduit for John, because they've established this rapport with each other, and eventually this friendship. But Al has got his own hang-ups from what it means to be a cop. For John, it was, I'm good at what I do. I've got paperwork, a backlog of paperwork and court hearings and all the shit that comes with the job that nobody ever talks about. So it's hard for him to walk away from the job. And for Al, he kind of had to walk away from a big part of the job because he shot somebody. Um, which there's a reason now why when you go to, the stores and stuff, that anything that even remotely looks gun shaped, no matter what it is, uh, they have those colored tips on the end. There's a reason that, yeah, it doesn't matter whether it looks exactly like something Dirty Harry may carry, all the way to a super soaker. They all have those orange tips for a reason. It's so that it says this is a toy, and it's that bright, same kind of like orange that hunters are supposed to wear, so that when you're out in the woods and somebody sees it, you can be like, that is not a deer. Don't shoot. It's kind of the universal color for do not shoot. But, in Al's case, he shows the remorse. He realizes that he screwed up. It was, unfortunately, in his case, it sounds like it was an honest mistake, but he's regretful for it and shows a remorse, and obviously is hesitant to put himself in a situation where he may have to draw a gun again. Unlike some people that have officers that have taken lives that shouldn't have, even now. Uh, we need more Al Powells out there, unfortunately, that show that remorse, and own up to their mistakes. Whether it's shooting a person or sometimes somebody's dog. Uh, Not bitter about that at all as a dog lover. Uh, oh, it's country, I tell you. But Al is, he's the support that John needs, that really only another cop that's not the stereotypical macho, masculine, uber masculine, I'm the man, I know everything, I never make mistakes, I never have feelings type. That, the, like we've said, kind of like those action heroes that we've had leading up to this point, where they don't show emotion, they don't get injured, they don't do anything except beat up the bad guys and then call it a day. But you've got Al, who's not that. He's not uber masculine. He's probably similar to John's age. So, he's been on the force for a while. He's got some years on under his belt. He's obviously built, kind of more the stereotypical cop. He's got the donut belly. It's like the guy rippling muscles. Again, as a child of two former law enforcement officers, I'm pretty sure donuts literally are part of my DNA. And in my bloodstream. My blood type is O. That is the shape of a donut. That is not a surprise.
Or a bagel, take your pick, I guess.
Yeah. So he's the right person, even though he comes into this situation absolutely accidentally. He just happens to be the person in the area at that time that they call for black and white, and ends up getting invited to the party whether he wants to or not. But he ends up being the absolute right person for it. Not just because of the support that he offers John, but also because presumably after everything that happens in this, when push comes to shove and there's one more bad guy, the kind of dude, what they make fun of in kind of in Scream, yeah, where it's like the bad guy is going to jump back to life at the last second, you got to take him down. This is, it's literally what happens in here. Is one of the bad guys that you thought was dead just pops up and it's like, machine gun, and everybody is so surprised by it, but Al doesn't even think about it. He pulls his gun and takes him down, without any hesitation. So he's a great character. He's a great character. Reginald Val Johnson absolutely, shines in this. And, as much as people crack jokes and all he's really done throughout his career is played cops, he makes a really good cop. What can I say?
Oh, big time. I mean, for my childhood, Carl Winslow was a big part of my childhood growing up. And that was what I knew Reginald Bell Johnson for the longest time was, of course, being, Carl Winslow. And that was, I said, love that show, was a big part of my childhood, and especially my sister's childhood. My brother was too young at the time to appreciate that. But yes, we definitely love Reginald very, very much for everything he's done, both on screens, both big and small. And Zan, what did you make of Al and Argyle?
Al and Argyle are fantastic characters. And one thing they really illustrate is how everything in this movie is deliberate. There are not a lot of stones unturned in this. And if we've opened a can of worms, we close it eventually in this movie. Even to the little things of, I've alluded to this a few times, even little things of where we see the bored security guards on the first floor of Nakatomi Plaza, and we see that there's a newsstand, and then we see Al Young later going, "Oh, look, free candy? Yeah, I'm about to shoot some cops, but free candy's free candy." So everything in this is kind of deliberate, even everything from John stealing cigarettes and then realizing, wait a minute, these are European cigarettes. And the payoffs we have with Argyle and Powell are definitely like that. And I'll start with Argyle because he definitely feels like kind of a throwaway character. And he feels to me like the connective tissue between John's New York life and John's Los Angeles life, because Argyle is the limo driver, that this is kind of his early, this is one of his first gigs. He used to be a cab driver. And so he's used to people wanting conversation. And, and I love that, he's like, I didn't know you were going to sit up front, and he's got his fast food wrappers and everything up there. That's one of the only other things that dates this movie is Argyle talking about the amenities of the limo. And in 1988, CD player, CB radio, VHS, that was the pinnacle of everything back then. That was an amazing, amazing ride he was going to have. But yeah, you think Argyle is there for exposition, to learn, okay, why are you here? Why is your wife here and you're not? What's going on? Oh, so you thought she'd come crawling back home. All the exposition that I talked about earlier with John and Holly. We sort of think Argyle is that way. But again, like I said, nothing really is a throwaway in this, because like Rachel said, you see Argyle listening to, I believe it's a Stevie Wonder song, really loud. He's not hearing the shots. John knows that there's somebody there, like, Argyle, tell me you heard the shots and you're calling the police. And he's on the phone, music blaring. Of course I'm coming over later, baby. Have I ever lied to you? And he's not hearing the shots. But when he does try to leave and the doors are all locked, he realizes that he's caged in the garage, because he's told John, here's my phone number. You and your lady run into each other's arms and it's happily ever after, or you call me and I'll take you to a hotel. So he's going to wait. And that's why his boss thinks he's on his way to Vegas, is, because, he tells John, remember that when you sign for the tip, he tells John, I'm going to wait for you. And he hasn't heard from John yet. And John calls him and they get cut off. And he's like, all right, you have the number, use it. He's just going to wait. He's still there. He said he was going to wait and he's going to do it. John said that the verdict's not in yet. So he's there. But when he finds himself locked in, what does he check? The CB radio that he told John they have. He can't use the phone to call John, but there's the CB radio. So he knows what's going on. And, he's stuck there and he's just there sort of listening, trying to figure out what's going to happen. And another reason why I absolutely love Argyle. Again, also, we see John going through the Los Angeles airport. Also, another thing that dates this movie, now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of things date this movie. The fact that he takes a gun on a plane. Even though he's a cop, he's got a gun on a plane. You can't do that unless you're the air marshal. But one of his carry-ons is a gigantic teddy bear. And what does Argyle do when he realizes he's locked in? Sees the teddy bear looking at him from the rearview mirror and just goes, shut up, when he looks at the teddy bear. It's an adorable moment. But one of my favorite things about Argyle is that he takes out who I think is our most villainous villain. Theo is a straight up psychopath. Theo comes in talking to Carl, talking about whatever move Magic Johnson had done for the most recent Lakers game, as Carl kills these men for no reason on Christmas Eve. And he just jumps over, kicks the dead body out of the chair, does what he needs to do with the computer, and goes for it.
He's very Simon Phoenix in that moment.
Yeah, he is. And in the moment when Gruber kills Takagi, which is very cold. That's a very cold moment. He looks at Theo. He barely even looks at Theo. He just says, "Now you can break the code." And what does Theo do? He quips, "You didn't bring me along for my charming personality." He just watched somebody shoot someone that he knows is a father of 5 in the head on Christmas Eve. And he's just laughing throughout this whole thing. And the quarterback is toast. You know, 'twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house not a creature was stirring, except the 4 assholes coming around the building in classic 2x2 cover formation. Theo's a psycho. Like, he's very frightening to me. And the fact that he is going to try and escape as an EMT, you know, it's like it's like a first responder. It just kind of shows you like how little regard he has for anything except his own gain. And so the fact that Argyle figures out, like, wait a minute, why is an ambulance being pulled out of a truck? Like, something's wrong here. And Argyle drives into that car and then punches Theo out and knocks him out cold. And, you know, I also love that we see so many shots of reflections in Theo's glasses. And Theo's glasses take such a theatrical bob up and down when he gets knocked in the face by Argyle. And I just love how Argyle's so proud of himself. Like, he's like, you know, trying to shake the paint off of his hand, but he's so proud of himself for knocking this guy out. And, you know, we as an audience know that this is a kind of a funny moment, but we also know that Argyle has just really taken out a major, major psychopath. And oddly enough, and we can talk about this more when we talk about the villains, Theo is our only survivor. And, you know, he gets knocked out, but he's our only survivor. So I love that Argyle comes back and is able to do something pretty amazing, because let's be honest, kind of a lot of our quote unquote terrorists are sort of like central casting, vaguely European terrorist number 5 type characters. They really don't. The only one who really matters, the only ones who matter are, of course, Karl Goodenough, his brother, and Heinrich, who has the detonators. But everybody else is sort of like, I don't know, Marco's on the street. Like, we don't really necessarily remember who's who, but Theo's a big deal. And the fact that Argyle takes him out, I think, is really great for his character, because, again, like I said, everything in this movie is very deliberate and delivers. Powell's the same way. Like Rachel said, Powell is starts out as this perfect cop trope, this perfect beat cop trope, kind of gut hanging over his belt, buying, you know, Twinkies. I thought you guys only like donuts. They're for my wife. Yeah, she's pregnant. Yeah. Just on his way home, doing a quick drive-by, and then gets involved in something really massive. And you find out over the course of his relationship with John who he is as a cop. And, you know, you have this, like Rachel was saying, this great cop camaraderie between the two of them, which is what Powell figures out, that he's a police officer. He's like, I think he's a cop, maybe not LAPD, but I think he's a badge. And, you know, why? Just a hunch, things he said, being able to spot a phony ID, blah, blah, blah. So they get this rapport. So John thinks that they can joke with each other. And he's like, what do you have, flat feet? Did you run over your captain's hat with your car? And it's like, no, I shot a kid. And, you know, like Rachel was saying, I long for the days where cops are remorseful for shooting kids. But that's how a cop is supposed to be. A cop is supposed to still want to prove himself as able to do the job, but understand the gravity of pulling your gun. And, you know, I love that moment where he's like, they can teach you anything at the academy except how to live with a mistake. And so, you know, that he is putting on a brave face every day and strapping on a gun that he is terrified of. And that, you know, he has PTSD from this horrible, horrible thing he did. And even he tries to even play it off when John is like, I am so sorry. He's like, hey man, you didn't know. He's like, yeah, but I still feel like shit anyway. Like they both know how severe this moment is. But he's still a really good cop, even when Deputy Chief Dwayne T. Robinson, who by the way is played by Paul Gleason, who is the principal in The Breakfast Club, and so I love to hate that guy when I see him in movies. When he says, anytime you want to go home, you're dismissed. And he's like, no, sir, you couldn't drag me away, because he's there for his fellow cop. He's there because he knows that there needs to be somebody on the ground that trusts their man inside, and not everybody. And everybody else around him has too much of an ego to do that. You have Deputy Chief Dwayne T. Robinson. You've got the SWAT guys who think that, send in the car. They think they know what they're doing. You can't send in the car with people who have a freaking rocket launcher. It's, pull back. You've made your point. Yeah, I'll take it under advisement, cowboy. Hit it again. Like, he knows who these people are. And you even have that moment with Johnny's like, when John says, this asshole does not know what kind of person you are, Hans, but I do. He says that to Ellis, but it's true. John knows what kind of people these are. And so does Al, because he's been talking to John. And when you have that, moment of John trying to say, do not come up here, this is a double cross. And he gets cut. It cuts out. Yeah, the FBI definitely has too much of an ego to believe John McClane. And Al Powell just sort of looks up at the roof, looks at the helicopter, and says, you're telling me. Like, he knows what's going to happen. So just because he is a desk jockey, as he calls himself, doesn't mean he's a C student cop. He's a really good cop who did a really, really horrible thing at one point and is trying to atone for that. He's trying to repent for that by doing everything he can. And so when we have the moment at the end, and I'll talk more about this when we talk about the end, where Goodenough comes back to life. Alexander Goodenough, Carl's character. Because again, comic book and soap opera rules apply. If you don't see a body that's fully dead, they might not be dead. And, we get the whole, I'm sorry, it's an extremely sexy scene to see Goodenough kicking somebody in the face. I know that makes me probably need some therapy, but Alexander Goodenough was a ballet dancer. And so he's very agile. And just to see him like with that long blonde hair, like kicking him in the face, I'm like, ooh, kick him again, please. They have that scene where they're fighting, and then John basically hangs him up from chains. He wraps the chains around his neck and hangs him, after, I'm going to cook you and I'm going to eat you. Like, who says that? But we see him struggling, and we see him neutralized. He dead, not neutral. Just like Carl said earlier, neutral, not dead. But we don't know quite what happens to that. We see people scream when they see him hanging there. But when we see him come out looking like a hostage, because, he's covered in a blanket and everything, and he's, he has the crazy eyes, and he's about to kill who the fuck ever, he's looking for John McClane, but he's going to kill whoever he needs to get there. And then you see him get shot. And McClane doesn't have a gun, because the gun McClane had 2 bullets in it, and one of them went into Huey Lewis's head, and then one of them went over, blew the window out. The American terrorist, I always just refer to him as Dollar Store Huey Lewis. We know John doesn't have a gun with bullets, so who does? And it's Powell. And you have this wonderful Michael Kamen score behind him, and like the smoking gun barrel. But then you have this incredibly serious look on Reginald Val Johnson's face. You can tell that this is like every court-ordered therapy session he's had because of this problem, because of this incident. You can tell that all of that emotion is in his face right there. Like, I have to do this. I am the one who can do this. I am the closest one there. I have to get over my fear. I have to put my grief aside. I have to put my guilt aside, and I have to take care of business. And the look on his face is so perfect. Like, Reginald Val Johnson does such a great job in that, because you can tell how hard that was for him. This is good. This guy's gonna kill somebody, and he's the only one that can stop it. And this time he knows it's a real gun. This is no toy ray gun that looks real in the dark. This is a machine gun, ho ho ho. And the gravity of it is not lost on any of us. I remember seeing it for the first time and we're all like, oh, holy shit, Powell just shot somebody. Like we as an audience know that this is a big deal for this character. And so again, that explains why Powell is just kind of doing a drive-by, but then it comes back as this reward, and I'll talk more about that when we talk about the ending. and then you also can tell that Powell kind of doesn't know what to do now, where he's just sort of now on the edge, and Argyle breaks out of the gated parking garage, and he's still got his gun. He's like, wait, what more noises? What do I do? What do I do? He has no idea what to do. So McClane very calmly puts his gun down. He's like, this one's with me. Because also McClane knows the gravity of this situation. And that's a way for McClane to be there for his new friend. Like, this is his new bestie. This is his trauma bonded bestie. And like I said, the gravity of a lot of the things that we see in this movie is another reason why this movie goes above most stupid blow shit up action movies. Because there's some real character studies in this and some really great, really heavy situations. And it doesn't really pull a lot of punches with things are problematic in this world. Relationships are problematic and complicated. And being a cop is complicated and problematic because we start out with what we think are these two classic tropes of police officers. The New York cop who plays by his own rules and, the fat patrol cop. But there's so much more to these characters and there's so much more to them. And I really like both of these actors. By the way, Devereaux White plays the kid that Ray Charles shoots at when he tries to steal a guitar from Ray's Music Exchange in the Blues Brothers. He was an actor as a child. And I like both of these actors, but I think Reginald VelJohnson specifically does a really, really good job of starting out as this, and this is another trope, just sort of the jovial fat man, but there's a lot to him, and you really see the emotion and the gravity of what he's gone through. And they're great allies of John McClane, but they're also just very strong characters who are able to rise to the occasion when they don't expect to. I'm sure Argyle probably thought he'd get a fat tip and then he'd go meet his girlfriend later because it's Christmas Eve. Al Powell thought he was going to go home to his pregnant wife on Christmas Eve. Nobody expected this. And these two characters show that even people who seem like they're just ordinary workaday folks can really be extraordinary heroes.
100%. Michael Bay, we know you're listening. Take notes. This is how you make a good action movie. That said, I think both Al and Argyle I agree with you, both serve very important functions in this film, but they do so in very different ways. Because Al, in my view, also is one of the film's most important characters. While the action story is built around isolation, Al gradually becomes the one genuine human connection John has throughout the entire ordeal. And their conversations give the film warmth and emotional texture. Because without Al, the story could have been a non-stop series of action scenes. Instead, it gains moments of vulnerability and trust. What I like most about Al is his decency. He's patient and he's empathetic and willing to listen. In a film filled with people making bad decisions, chasing publicity, or acting out of self-interest, Al consistently behaves like a good person trying to do the right thing. He provides emotional support without feeling sentimental. And I think he also mirrors John in an interesting way. Both men carry personal burdens, but Al has a gentler disposition. John fights his problems head on and sometimes recklessly. Al tends to process things more thoughtfully. And I think their friendship works because each provides something the other lacks. As for Argyle, he might be a much smaller character, but I think I agree with you both, he's surprisingly memorable because he does bring this easygoing, optimistic energy to the film. From the moment he appears, he feels approachable and genuine. and his presence helps establish a sense of normal life before everything goes wrong. What I think makes Argyle work is that the film doesn't overuse him. He spends much of the story physically separated from the main action, yet the audience never completely forgets him. He's almost like a reminder that there is a world outside the crisis. And I think his scenes provide brief moments of relief from the tension without undermining it. And there's also something appealing about his loyalty. Once he realizes something unusual is happening, he doesn't simply disappear from the story. He remains connected to the situation in his own way and ultimately contributes when it matters. So I'd say taken together, these two help balance the film. Al provides emotional grounding and human connection. Argyle provides charm, humor, and a touch of everyday normality. Neither character is flashy, but both make the world feel more lived in. They are the kind of supporting characters who remind you that a film like Die Hard isn't just interested in action. It's interested, to your point, Zan, in people, which is why this is how you make a good action movie. So let's get to some other rather interesting characters. We have the aforementioned Paul Gleason as Dwayne T. Robinson, Robert Davi as Big Johnson, and William Atherton as Richard Thornburg. So, Zan, what did you make of these rather colorful characters?
Well, if you grew up in the 80s watching movies at all, William Atherton is your favorite villain. He's your favorite asshole actor. From Ghostbusters to A Real Genius to this movie, every time you look at him, you're like, oh, God, it's him again. And he's so perfect for it. And he
has no dick.
I'm gonna fix you. I'll fix you, Venkman. I'm gonna fix you. I can't believe you're actually considering listening to these men. Yeah, him in Ghostbusters is just brilliant. He's been great ever since Sugarland Express. He's a fantastic actor and just brilliant at playing horrible, horrible people. And I love him from the very beginning when we see him, where he's on the phone talking to Monica, I can get us a table. I'm telling you, Wolfgang and I are very old friends. This is around the time Wolfgang Puck became famous. He's obviously a name dropper and trying to use his status as this local news celebrity to get whatever he wants. And, we think that he's a terrible person just because he's kind of an egocentric maniac where he's like, I can get a jump on everybody if I can take a van down there. And the all of the news crew is hilarious. Eat it, Harvey. And Harvey not knowing that Helsinki is in Finland and not Sweden. By the way, one of the woman who is the newscaster is Mary Ellen Trainor, who was all over the 80s. She was married to Robert Zemeckis at the time. So, she's Mikey and Brant's mom and Goonies and all kinds of stuff. So, but, he seems like a guy that's just trying to become the next, like, hard-hitting reporter. But there's just so much ego there that you just kind of can't stand him because he's there for himself and not to keep the public involved. And that becomes glaringly obvious when, his assistant, who is played by Tracy Reiner, daughter of the late great Penny Marshall, and her stepfather was the late great Rob Reiner. They're doing their research and they find out who John McClane is when they, after Ellis spills the beans about who John McClane is, and they find out that he's married to somebody who lives in LA, and he goes to the house and we've already heard, again, deliberate. This movie is very deliberate. We've already heard Holly on the phone with Paulina, her, I'm assuming, nanny slash housekeeper. We already know that there is a woman at the house with the kids that's taking care of the kids that we trust. So we trust that the kids are going to be okay. But, he shows up and he's like trying to interview children. Like, this guy is a douche, right? And then we see him turn the cameras off and say to Paulina, you let me in or I call the INS. Comprende? Which is basically like saying, I'm going to call ICE on you. And so she has to, she has to relent. And then we have that moment where he's like, if your parents are listening, is there anything you want them to say? And you see poor little Lucy McLean saying, come home, which of course elicits a reaction from Holly, which Hans notices. And now we find out that Hans can figure out who Holly is. And then it becomes even more of a shit show. So he's horrible. He's such a horrible character. And you're kind of interested in what he's doing, because he is the voice of how this is being communicated to the public, because now somebody has heard, and that's what they do. They did exactly what Argyle did. They listened to the police scanner to find a news story, and they figured it out. I've always wanted a Die Hard that has like a post-credits scene where the 911 dispatcher has to go under a professional review for not listening to what happened. Her whole like, this is a private channel. Like, yeah, he's not ordering a pizza, and when, they hear gunfire, she's like, see if somebody can do a drive-by. Like, really, lady, you didn't pay attention to this? And I'm sure she's at home going, oh shit, I think I might have dropped the ball on that. I've always wanted a postscript to what happened to her. And so they sort of figure out what's going on. And that's where we wind up getting our backstory about Hans Gruber, is because he's reporting on it. Even if it's not Thornburg reporting on it, you have that scene where Gail Wallens is saying, sources say that the terrorist leader Hans might be this man, Hans Gruber, a member of the radical East German Volksfrei movement, which, by the way, is phony. That's not a real thing. So we start to learn about who these people are through the newscasters. So, the fact that he's being this invasive is worth it to the story, but you definitely love to hate this guy. And as much as I love watching Theo get punched out by Argyle, watching Thornburg get punched out by Holly is amazing at the end of this movie. Because I don't care. You don't do that. You don't go interview like 5-year-olds when their parents are on TV being held hostage on Christmas Eve. That is a douche move. It's not going to advance your career. People are going to see that for the douche move that it really is. And I talked a little bit before about our other police force here. Deputy Chief Drain Robinson is one of those, I don't want to call him a bad cop, but he's very much a C student cop. He's very cynical. He's very much a C student. And he's willing to believe that whatever is going on is the least possible effort on his part. Where he's like, all we know is that somebody shot up your car. He's kind of like Annie's dad in Halloween. All they stole was a Halloween mask, some rope, and a couple of knives. Who do you think it was? A serial killer. Thank you very much, Officer Loomis. Or Officer Brackett. Where he's like, somebody shot up your car. It could have been the person you're talking to. Well, it was, but still. Well, who was the dead body? I don't know. Some stockbroker got depressed. It's like, you're not going to investigate a dead body that fell from the roof on Christmas Eve? Like, he's so ready to just wrap this up regardless of what is the truth and what's really happening. And his refusal to believe that there's more here than meets the eye is what makes him this total C student of a cop. And his hero worship of the FBI when they show up, Agents Johnson and Johnson, no relation, and his ass kicking of them just sort of shows you that he's gotten to his position not from being a good cop, but from being kind of an ass kisser. All of the, it's like, oh, the FBI is here now. Do you want a breath mint? And the FBI comes in all swagger. One of the few times we see Robert Davi as the quote unquote good guy, even though he's still kind of a douche. Where he's like, we're in charge now, and when we commandeer your men, we'll try to let you know. And Robinson's like, oh, okay, whatever you need. And even when he tries to stick up for the city, when Johnson and Johnson want to cut the power grid, He's like, it's Christmas Eve. Whose authorization? How about the United States fucking government? That wonderful line that he delivers there. He's just such an ass kisser. He's like, Mayor's gonna have my ass. He's just sort of worried about how it affects him. And I think he doesn't want to be there Christmas Eve, and he wants to do as little as possible. And the fact that Al Powell is making him do more shit than he wants to do is getting on his nerve. That's why he's telling Powell, you can go home, mostly because I don't want to listen to you tell me that I'm not doing my job, essentially. And, even when they have the SWAT guys, everything he says is like a repeat. When Al Powell says, tell them to come back, he's like, pull them back. They're burning in there. Like, he's not really making any calls. He's not a particularly good authority, which is why John McClane, says, Glass, who gives a shit about Glass? From up here, it doesn't look to me like you're in charge of jack shit, Dwayne. Quit being part of the problem and put the other guy back on. That he needs to be told off about that because he's not in charge of jack shit. And when the FBI comes in, like I said, they're all swagger. And Robert Davi's perfect for that. And they're all ego. And they inadvertently make these exceptional thieves successful at what they're trying to do. They're trying to get through 8 security locks on a giant vault door. And they've gotten through like 3 or 4 of them. It's taking forever. Even Theo says this last one's going to take a miracle. It's Christmas, Theo. It's time for miracle. It's the time for miracles. And they have the FBI playbook and they're following it step by step, regardless of whether or not it's the right thing to do. They're not listening to anybody. They don't know what's going on. They don't know anything about this building. They don't know anything about the intent of what we think are the terrorists. And I love that the news, they do bring a TV in and put on the news, and now Hans and everybody knows that the world thinks they're terrorists. So they can make the FBI run around doing stupid shit like freeing their comrades of the Asian Dawn movement and the Liberté de Quebec and all of the other comrades in arms that he wants the United States to rattle its saber for. He's able to make them do the runaround, and they sort of do it because they think they're in control because they're the FBI. And just because you're the FBI doesn't mean you know anything. Al Powell's the one who's been there. He's the one that knows what's going on. He's the one that's been talking to the man on the inside. And they don't care about what John McClane has to say. They think they know what they're doing. And that is such an amazing moment when they're about to cut the power. And even Hans knows, forget about the LAPD. When the FBI gets here, that's when we need to start worrying about communicating. That's when we need to start worrying about what law enforcement is doing to us. And when he realizes that what they're going to do is cut the power, and he's like, the circuits that cannot be cut locally are cut automatically in response to a terrorist incident. You ask for miracles, Theo, I give you the FBI. And they cut the power, and it's this beautiful moment of Beethoven's Ode to Joy chorus. And they cut the power, and the vault opens, and the breeze is on Hans's hair, and Theo's just like, Merry Christmas. And downstairs, the FBI guys are like, oh, they're probably pissing in their pants right now. Like, they don't have freaking flashlights. Like, you don't think they came equipped with flashlights, and the building doesn't have a secondary generator with emergency lights? Like, what does he think they're doing? There's just such incredible ego there, and such disregard for the people. They're interested in, again, they're like Johnson, where what they want to do is solve the problem, whether or not it's the best way of doing it or not. Where, they're talking about they're going to get in the helicopters, damn right, fully armed. And once everybody's on the roof, they're going to try and take out the terrorists and lose maybe 20-25% of the hostages. And Agent Johnson's like, I can live with that. It's like, really? Christmas Eve, you can live with just shooting people for no reason because you're shitty aim? Like, come on. And to see them, not that I like to see anybody die in a movie. That's a lie. I do like to see people die in a movie sometimes. Sometimes characters are horrible. I don't get enough of Johnson and Johnson to really want them to die, but I kind of don't care that they do. because they're up there in the helicopter and they're thinking they're gonna, just like fucking Saigon. I was in junior high, dickhead. These sort of PTSD Vietnam guys who still have the anger and the aggression from the war that they have not examined. And fortunately, John gets everybody to go back downstairs. They blow the roof, and that catches the helicopters. And I'm sorry, but the FBI playbook cannot be run step by step. You have to alter it for your situation. And I'm sorry, but Robinson's line of, I guess we're going to need more FBI guys, is just funny because he totally wants there to be more FBI guys because he doesn't want to have to be in charge. He's in charge, but he doesn't want to have to do anything. And now that the FBI guys are gone, A, there's nobody he can impress and kiss up to, and B, now he has to be in charge again and deal with everything. And he doesn't want that either. And the fact that at the end of our movie, when we have our wonderful meeting / reunion, and he comes in with the reality, McClane, I want to debrief. You've got some things to answer for. Ellis's murder, for one thing. It's almost like Carl shows up and interrupts that, because that is so not what the point is here. Johnson has completely missed the point. Not Johnson. Robinson has completely missed the point. And Carl coming in back from the dead with the gun, shooting it up while Robinson is trying to get answers from McClane with what he thinks are the most egregious crimes McClane could have done. It just sort of shuts him up like, dude, this is not, you're missing the point. I'm going to show you the point. Here I am with my gun and my bloody face, the chain marks on my neck. This is what I am, your imminent danger here. John McClane is the least of your worries. And, we have that great moment where he just gets shut up by the reality of this group of guys. The only one left, or that we think is the only one left, is Carl. And the reality of what's really going on in there and who these people really are just sort of show up. And then Robinson really doesn't have anything else to say after that, because he is way out of his, he is boxing outside of his weight with this one. And, we never hear from him again. It's the end of the movie, but still, we never, you hear a little a bit about it in Die Hard 2 of, how he was debriefed and everything. But yeah, it's like, shut up, Robinson. You're not in charge of jack shit. John McClane was right.
He was 100% right on that one for sure. And Rachel, what did you make of these three characters?
I want to punch all of them. I mean, you've got Gruber, you've got his henchman, and it's like, yeah, they're dangerous, but they're very calculated, and they have a very specific plan, and they're not going to deviate from that plan if they can help it, because they've got this planned out to the second on how this is going to go. Unlike these dickwads who are idiots and probably struggle to tie their own shoes on some days. These guys would not know a well laid out plan if it bit them on the face. And that makes them way more dangerous, honestly, because they are so unpredictable, because they're not thinking. They are just going with whatever. They're going with what makes them look the best. Yeah, what's going to impress their boss. You've got a chief of police or whatever who apparently desperately wants to work for the feds and wants to do everything he thinks that the feds want one of their people to do. He's trying to act and think like a fed when it's like, no, act and think like the way you're trained. Do the job you're here to do, you dumbass. And yes, I get it. It's Christmas Eve. I'm sure nobody wants to be working on Christmas Eve. They'd rather be home with their families or significant others or just anywhere else. than working on Christmas Eve. But when you work in one of these types of jobs, unfortunately, holidays don't care. Crime doesn't care that it's Christmas Eve. That's probably why Gruber and his cronies picked this particular night. Because a lot of the businesses nearby were going to be closed. Um, so, but just because, it's, you're like, oh, woe is me. It sucks. I'm working on Christmas Eve. Doesn't mean you don't do your job. You're working on Christmas Eve. Do your fucking work. That means listening to the cop who's been there for quite a while, talking to a guy on the inside, giving you very relevant information that become very handy instead of coming in, waving, your dick around and acting like you're the big man on campus. That's not how it works. I mean, yes, thankfully, other than Holly's boss and Ellis, which I'm not going to lose any sleep over Ellis, seemingly nobody else from the business was killed. There's going to be probably some injuries, a lot of PTSD, but nobody else was killed, as far as we know, of Holly's coworkers. It was just the security guards, and Hans and his cronies. But still, there's a hell of a lot of property destruction and trauma that could have been avoided if people had listened to Al in the first place. And then the FBI shows up, which, granted, if you're dealing with, the minute that it starts getting into potential terrorism and the like, yes, the FBI has to get involved here, at least here on American soil. That's why it's called the FBI, federal. They deal with stuff like that here on American soil. But again, Johnson & Johnson, no relation, very much come in like they're the big men on campus, and they act like they know exactly what's going on. They know exactly what needs to be done, and they are proven wrong over all these people that can't come in, think they know exactly what they're doing and exactly what, how things should play out, and they're proven wrong over and over and over again.
Very much.
And then you got our TV anchor, who the punch from Holly is the least he needs to be given as far as punishment. Even now, in the it's easier to do shit like this now, unfortunately, in the age of social media. But wanting to be quote unquote first usually does not turn out well. There have been so many instances where a crime, an incident, something has occurred, and a news outlet, even our own fucking FBI, has wanted to be first to put information out there and have been wrong, or have called out the wrong person or identified the wrong person. So him going to their house and putting one of their kids on TV was at the very least a dick move. And then threatening poor Paulina was a dick move. But putting one of their young kids on TV like that, dangerous. For all they knew, that, Gruber and his cronies were also watching the TV. Maybe they saw that and be like, oh, look, kids home without the parents. They could easily turn their kids into additional leverage. And also, he was putting a poor kid on TV, and it's like, what if one or if both of her parents hadn't survived? And she's gonna have, she's gonna be like, well, I told the camera I wanted mommy and daddy to come home, and they didn't come. They never came home. Like, what would you think that would do to her? It's like just his entire way he went about this to be quote unquote first to get ahead of like the other networks and whatever, without even considering the consequences and how this may, play out. It's like, we all know what happened. Well, maybe not. We all know. But unfortunately, we do have a history of ongoing crimes being televised live. And guess what? The bad guys are watching. So they know exactly what's happening.
It's for such small potatoes, too. Like when he gets the explosion, he's like, eat your heart out, Channel 5. Not eat your heart out, ABC or NBC, the other local news affiliate. Like, oh my God, aim higher, Thornburg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like the whole thing is just every single one of these guys is just like, I just want to absolutely punch them right in the face. Like Holly started it. We're gonna start a line. We're gonna start a line, and we're just gonna line these guys up and be like pow 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 because they all deserve it.
It's like that scene in Airplane where they're smacking
or they're smacking the lady.
Woman.
Yeah,
It's just a line where everybody
exactly.
gets to smack Thornburg.
Yes, it's just like it's not worth it. I know the whole "if it bleeds, it leads" is a common tactic, but a mantra, but it's not worth it. And the Al's boss and the FBI agents, those are the type of guys that I'm talking about when I'm talking about the kind of guys that John probably spends time with when he's at work. There's guys on the force that are probably like that. And if any of those guys had been the one on the line with him instead of Al, this would not have gone well at all. All these guys are what not to do and what not to be like.
We likely would have had a very, very different outcome, I think, had the wrong person been on the other end with John, for sure. And, and I love the fact that we get characters like these because, once again, this isn't your typical action movie. You also get some great social commentary as well. I mean, because these three, I think, feel like different ways that the film explores authority and ego and how people behave under pressure. I'll start with Dwayne Robinson. I think what stands out is how confidently wrong he often is. He is in a position of authority, but he's more focused, like you guys were saying, on control, procedure, and appearances than understanding what's actually happening. And that creates a lot of friction. The film doesn't portray him as a villain in a traditional sense, but as someone whose need to be seen as in charge gets in the way of good judgment. He's a reminder that authority without flexibility can become a liability in a crisis. And then, yes, there's Richard Thornburg, who I think feels like the film's clearest critique of sensationalism. He's not trying to solve the problem or understand it. He's trying to turn it into content. And what makes him interesting is that he's not openly malicious in a cartoonish way. He's opportunistic. He sees fear and confusion and tragedy as material. And that makes him more uncomfortable, I think, than a straightforward antagonist because he reflects something recognizable in media behavior. His presence adds a different kind of tension that isn't physical, but ethical. And Big Johnson, I think, is part of the film's commentary on bravado and ego inside tactical response, as you guys were both saying. He and the other Johnson tend to represent a kind of overconfidence that comes from training and group identity. There is this performative toughness to them, a sense that they are playing a role as much as executing a job. And I think the film undercuts that bravado by repeatedly showing how little it helps when the situation doesn't follow the script. What I'd say ties all three characters together is that they contrast with the more grounded improvisational approach we see elsewhere in the story. Where others lean on authority and image or procedure, these characters expose the limits of those things when real pressure hits. They aren't just obstacles in the plot. They're part of the film's larger idea that competence under pressure doesn't always align with rank, confidence, or even visibility. So I think very important characters to the overarching story. Speaking of very important characters, let's round off with our villain. We have the late, great Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber. So, Rachel, your thoughts on the leader of our thieves?
Oh, what can I say about Alan? This is even now, it's been a decade. Now, it's been a decade since we lost Alan. And this is still one of the few of his movies that I can watch without wanting to cry. He was such an amazing actor, and the fact that this was his first film role, he'd done television and theater before this, and he literally had just moved to the United States, to California, to pursue film when this role came a calling, and he almost didn't want to take it because he was afraid of getting typecast. Like, here I am, British guy, you know. Not that he was playing somebody British, but still, the Brits tend to be cast as villains. Look at all the bad guys in Star Wars that aren't Darth Vader. Um, and but circumstances being what they are, he took the job, and a iconic villain was born. Like I said, he's almost always in the top 10 of movie villains. And a star essentially was born out of this too. He would, after this, yes, Alan did play a lot of villains. The sheriff, his sheriff of Nottingham is the best thing from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. you know, uh, even even his characters where they weren't necessarily villains, but were kind of morally gray, like Snape in the Harry Potter movies. The man was just brilliant. I mean, he could also be funny though too. That's the great thing about it. It's just like, Hans is so imposing in this. And the thing is like, compared to his cronies, there's what, like 10, 12 of these guys ish. And a lot of a lot of the actors were hired just because they were big and muscly. They didn't really care whether they were German or not. Some were Russian, some were whatever. But they wanted really tall guys with a lot of muscles. They were looking for Schwarzenegger type builds. And then you've got, your IT guy obviously does not necessarily need to be a lot of muscly. And not all of them are big and broad and muscly, but still. And then you've got Hans, who is in this immaculately tailored suit, with the perfectly coiffed hair, the perfectly, structured goatee. The nice shoes, holds himself very composed. When they come off the elevator, yes, it's somebody else that, one of the other guys that makes some shots to get the crowd's attention. But once they've got everyone's attention, he's not yelling. He's just calmly letting them know why they're there and what is going to, how the rest of the evening is going to play out. Like, he never really raises his voice. Like I said, he only kills outright 2 people. And one of them, I'm not going to lose any sleep over. Ellis was a fucking idiot. Again, just like just like our group of guys we were just talking about, he thought that he was smarter than everybody else. He thought he could waltz in the room and be this amazing hero, and the terrorists would get what they want, and the hostages would be released, and he would be the hero of the day. And we saw how that worked out for him. So I'm not losing any sleep over Gruber shooting Ellis. But it's like he never really, he's so calm and collected and composed throughout most of this movie. And that's what makes him so dangerous, is because you get this guy is really, really, really smart, and he's probably like, it's like playing chess with a grandmaster. Probably he is thinking 27 steps ahead and thinking of all the different ways, like, oh, if they do this, then we're gonna have to do this move, or and it's only it's only through John's being the one thing they could not account for because he was not supposed to be there. He is the fly in the ointment. you know he is the piece of Hans's well meticulously thought out plan that does not fit in because he was not supposed to be there in the first place. And ultimately, that is what is Hans's literal and figurative downfall, is his hubris. As the case with a lot of very classic villains, their ego and their hubris ultimately leads to their destruction, to their losing. Because the minute you think you are the smartest person in the room and better than everybody else and king in the mountain, there's nowhere to go but down. Oh, and it's just absolutely brilliantly played by Alan Rickman. This easily could have gone in the way of mustache twirling, baddie, but they didn't. They didn't let it go that way. Instead, they came up with a character who is extremely dangerous, but so captivating. You just have to watch. You have to watch and just, you're just kind of mesmerized trying to figure out how this guy's brain works, because he's working on a different level than the rest of us. And, you know, uh, everybody who was in this movie has had nothing but wonderful things to say about Alan. And it's like when he was in front of the camera and doing his thing, he was terrifying. But the minute that the camera was not rolling, he was the nicest, kindest, most gentle person you could ever meet, which is par for the course for a lot of people to play villains, actually. It seems.
That is certainly the case. I mean, as I've often mentioned on this podcast, I've always heard only good things when it comes to folks like Robert Englund, for example, who apparently is very personable and a really nice chap. So I hope someday to be able to meet him or any of these guys, but, we'll see. Maybe someday I might bump into them if they decide to visit Italy, or if I eventually come over to the States. And Zan, your thoughts on Herr Gruber?
Oh, I have so many thoughts. We have this, like Rachel said, this group of nondescript European, what we think are terrorists that come in here. And like I said, this was 1988. We still had an East Germany. We still had a Cold War. We still had all of that going on. And, we have our villains. Let's just shout out for a second to Wilhelm von Homburg, who the following year played Vigo the Carpathian in Ghostbusters 2. Even though Max von Sydow was his voice, he was the face of it. And you, like I said, you have everybody that is just sort of nondescriptly Europe. Like Marco, like, is maybe kind of Italian. Then you have that one guy that like sounds German, but he's got Billy Connolly's hair. You have Al Young, who I refer to a lot as Genghis Khan, and it's because he's Genghis Khan in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. So he's one of those guys that I refer to as the first time I saw him, and so he's Genghis Khan. And you have this whole group of guys, and then you have the one with the Fabio hair. Like, they're so fantastic. And then of course you have Carl, who is Alexander Godunov, who was in some weird movies. Like, he's in The Money Pit with Shelley Long. Okay. But I want to say that he was either married to or partnered with Jacqueline Bisset for a while. But yeah, he's an interesting person. I would look him up. Like I said, he was a ballet dancer, very agile, very powerful dancer. You have these guys that, like, when Godunov comes in with that black shirt that's like unbuttoned a little too far and the black pants and the gun on his hip, you're like, okay, these guys are a force to be reckoned with. Even though you have the goofiness of Theo and Huey Lewis. And like I said, Theo is pure psycho. And all of these guys are just sort of there. You can sort of tell that they're there for the cause, but you don't know what the cause is yet. But you have that amazing shot of Gruber walking in. He's backlit, he's shot from underneath, and he just swaggers in. And this welcome to Filmland's introduction to Alan Rickman. This is Alan Rickman's first movie. That's incredible. That it is incredible that this is what introduces him to not just American audiences, but film-going audiences all across the world. He's our he's our typical story of Royal Shakespeare Company doing what the Royal Shakespeare Company would consider extremely schlocky stuff, but becoming wildly famous for it. But he walks in and absolutely 100% understands the assignment, Alan Rickman. This character is so perfect, and he's so disturbingly calm through this movie, through most of this movie. The way he is, ladies and gentlemen, just trying to calm everybody down. And the way he, like I said, the way he's using the current political climate to disguise his true intentions is diabolically brilliant. Because let's be honest, this is 1988. This is like a group of like upwardly mobile yuppies. Are they really all that up on the news? Not necessarily. They're probably like Ellis, who, when he talks about current events, it's just racial slur after racial slur after racial slur. You're like, wait, slow down. The who? Who are we talking about? And I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about Ellis. Ellis is Ellis is what David Addison would have been if he were in a movie. 80s, in it for the money, in it for the cocaine, in it for the image, and thinks he knows everything. And I'll get more in. He's played by Hart Bochner, who is the son of Lloyd Bochner, who is the guy on who gets on the spaceship only to find out that To Serve Man is a cookbook in the Twilight Zone. That's Hart Bochner's father. He's also a voice in Batman Mask of the Phantasm. He's the councilman who is an anti-Bruce Wayne guy. So Hart Bochner's cool. Anyway, so Hans comes in and he's eerily calm about it. And again, nothing in this movie is wasted. This movie is so incredibly deliberate. Like Rachel was saying, he's well dressed. And, the way he's talking to Takagi about his, I can talk about model making and men's fashions all day, but we must get down to business. He's so incredibly polite until, he shoots him in the head. He's talking about, he knows what kind of suit Takagi's wearing. He knows everything about Takagi's family. By the way, thank you very much, bullshit American public school system. This was how I learned as a 12-year-old about Japanese internment camps. Was learning about Takagi's history. And just the way he is so deliberate and so calm and so complimentary. I loved model making as a child. The attention to every minute detail. And that's Hans, is attention to every minute detail. And even when they are in the elevator together, and what is he whistling? Beethoven's Ode to Joy chorus. And so he's setting up so much in this movie. And even when everybody is like, we have to find him and shut him up, he's telling them everything. Let him, I don't care. Close him in. Doesn't matter. I'm waiting for the FBI to get here. He knows that all of this is going on. Even with Carl, when Carl's, Carl is the brother of the guy that McClane kills and tries to steal his shoes. And now I have a machine gun. Ho, ho, ho. That's Carl's brother. Also, that relationship is adorable, where Carl's brother is trying to meticulously cut the phone lines, and Carl just comes in with a chainsaw. That's such a brother thing to do, right? So even when they're finding out that there's a guy that is stealing their shit and killing their other guys, they're like, we have to do something. Yeah, we do. We have to tell Carl that his brother is dead. And even when Carl is freaking out, he's like, yes, you're going to be able to hunt him down and kill him. But for right now, we don't alter the plan. He's very calm, but also another good example of why you can't always expect the plan to go exactly as you think, because there is a wrench in the works and a fly in the ointment. And even when he finds out about McClane, He's like, what? Are you a security guard? And he's like, where's the best place to transmit? Okay, go to the roof. Like he kind of figures it out. And then he's doing okay. He's like, just neutralize him, cut him off, whatever. We keep going through our plan. But then he finds out he's stolen the detonators. They need the detonators to blow up the roof. And we think he needs the detonators to maybe blow up the safe. But no, he needs the detonators to blow up the roof. And the moment when he's talking to Takagi, back to the safe, the moment when he's talking to Takagi and he's like, I'm not interested in your project in Indonesia. What I am interested in is the $600 million worth of bearer bonds stored in your vault. And the combination controls the vault. And he's like, what? You want money? What kind of terrorists are you? Who said we were terrorists? Like, he never said anything. He just went in there as a German rambling on about capitalism, and everybody thinks this is an East German communist. He just let people draw their own conclusions. And the way he's so calmly, Takagi thinks he's playing chess with a novice, but he's playing chess with a master, where he's saying, get on the phone to Tokyo, they'll tell you. I don't know it. I can't tell you. You're just going to have to kill me. And he just cocks his head and says, okay, bam, right between the eyes. I mean, that's a horrifying scene. And what has now, up until now, been, and let me tell you what this was like to watch in 1988. We have this action movie with what we think is David Addison making some quips, and now we have some nondescript Europeans here. Now this movie means business. This movie does not pull any punches. And we are like, oh shit, this is real. Okay. And then when he gets up, he's like, clean that up and go figure out. He's so incredibly, incredibly calm until John McClane keeps screwing everything up. We have the moment where he's going to go find the detonators because nobody else can. So he's going to go find the detonators. He finds them. He then finds John McClane, puts on his best American accent, and he does such a good job of sounding like a German guy trying to do an American accent. Because he's kind of not great at it, but he's not great at it. He still kind of sounds vaguely German, which is amazing how he does that. And that moment where he just very calmly, you see him from behind, point a gun at McClane's back and speak in German and, tries to shoot. And then he's like, what the hell happened? And even then he's like, what do you think? I'm fucking stupid, Hans? And then the elevator dings and Hans just says, you were saying? Because he still has he keeps getting the upper hand on him. And even when he shoots out the glass, when he can see that John McClane has bare feet, again, the bare feet comes back. Nothing is wasted in this movie. Everything is deliberate. And so everything is going crazy until, finally the FBI, and he starts to calm down again with the whole, you asked for miracles, Theo, I give you the FBI. The vault opens, they're opening everything. Everything's getting ready to go. They're going to take everybody up. And then all of a sudden, everybody's coming back downstairs. What the hell happened? What's wrong? Carl's dead. Everybody's coming back downstairs. There's actually not that many of them left anymore. Thanks to, because, I'm sorry, the rocket launcher kind of got some of their guys too. They're going to, there's not a lot of ways to split $600 million. By the end of this, there's like 3 guys. There's not a lot of people. So he's getting ready. And, the building's falling down around them because they have blown the roof. And even when he explains, when you steal $600, you can disappear. When you steal 600 million, they will find you unless they think you're already dead. And he's so we know his goal is to make them think he's one of the hostages that's dead. And he's scrambling to pack up $600 million worth of bearer bonds is heavy and takes up a lot of bags. So it's good that they bring dollies and carts with them. And he's trying everything's on fire, and he's there with Holly because he's watched the news. Like Rachel was saying, Thornburg is not paying a damn bit of attention to how dangerous he's putting this entire family in by telling them who John McClane is. He's now figured out that Holly is his wife. And now he's snapped into action, and now he is flying by the seat of his pants. He's like, Mrs. McClane, come with me. We're going the other way. And now he's starting to freak out because now the clock is ticking. And, the FBI is about to show up. They're going to blow up the roof. The clock is ticking. And you're seeing little cracks in him. And when Holly says, for all your speeches and all your posturing, you're nothing but a common thief, that cracks him completely. That's when he loses it and he, you know, scuttles over to her on his hands and knees and gets in her face and says, I am an exceptional thief, Mrs. McLean. And since I'm moving up to kidnapping, you should be more polite. Because he didn't expect to kidnap everybody. He expected to kill everybody. And, he keeps packing. And then McLean shows up. He's got the gun taped to his back. His white tank top is black now from sweat and dirt and grime and ash and fire and whatever. He just comes in and he's Hans, and they all turn to look, and Holly's in, he pulls Holly out of the shadows. She sees him and she's just like, Jesus, like what he's been through. And Huey Lewis thinks he's going to solve the day and pulls a gun on him. And Hans just says, 9, this is mine. Like there is no way he's going to lose this mano a mano moment with McLean. They're going head to head. And here's the thing. If Huey Lewis had just shot him in the head, they would have made it out of there. If he hadn't been so intent on his own cowboy ending to this movie. He wanted to ride off into the sunset with Grace Kelly after vanquishing his villain, Hans did. And, we have that, he's like, what was it you were saying to me before? Oh, yes. Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker. Which is funny in the German accent. And we all start laughing. And then John McClane's 2 bullets come back. And Hans has been bested for a final time. And he does not go down without a fight. We see him out the window, slow motion, holding on to Holly. He's either going to bring her with him or he's going to be able to get his gun out and shoot McLean. He is going to shoot one or both of them in the face. And don't forget that they are what is keeping him from plummeting to the ground. He kind of doesn't care. As long as he can take them with him, he's fine. And, we have the moment where we get the watch off and then he falls. And like I said, the stunt guy said, we're going to drop you like 5 feet, but they dropped him like 20 feet and he didn't know about it. And so that look on his face is pure, genuine shock and horror and betrayal. And it works really well for that character because the look on his face is that look of how the hell did Andy Dufresne get the best of him? It's like, how did this happen? How did this fucking guy ruin my plans? I was going to be on the beach earning 20%, and now I'm going to plummet to my death from the 30th floor. How did this happen? So that look of shock on his face works. Really, really works for the character. But, you see him so psychotically calm throughout this entire movie until finally John McClane. And even when Holly has her moment of saying only John can drive someone that crazy, she's talking about Carl. She's not talking about Hans. Hans is holding his shit together until Holly calls him common and until John shows up. And now it's time for mano a mano. And he is, Americans all alike, but he's still searching for that same ending as well. Just another American who saw too many cowboy movies. You obviously saw them too, because here you are with your Sergio Leone moment of, the good guy and the bad guy having their final showdown. But he lets, revenge kept him from succeeding. Like I said, if he had let Huey Lewis just shoot John McClane, they'd be out of this. And he couldn't do it. His ego could not let him do that. His ego could not let him be called common, and his ego could not let somebody else kill John McClane because this is mine. And he didn't even say, no, I kill him. He just says, this is mine. This moment, this showdown, all of it is mine because he can't let that go. And, it is kind of horrifying to see him fall because we've watched all of these terrorists / exceptional thieves die, like I said, except for Theo. And so, we have that little moment of levity of, I hope that wasn't a hostage. Because we kind of do. We kind of hope it's not a hostage. And the problem is also, we are wildly entertained by Hans Gruber. Hans Gruber is such a proficient villain that we're kind of sad to see him go. You know, I think that's why I like Die Hard 3 so much, because we get the vengeance that Hans Gruber wanted, but through his brother. You know, we get that nostalgia of Hans Gruber. Even though we can't have Hans Gruber, we can have somebody seeking vengeance for him because we get it. You know, we get why somebody would want to, because he and McClane, this got personal. This got real personal real fast. And he is a villain that we, not that we love to hate, but that we love to watch because he's perfect. You know, there are often times when I say actors are born to play a role. I can't imagine anybody else playing this role. And this is the epitome of understanding the assignment in Alan Rickman's performance.
Definitely a performance for the ages. And funny enough that you mentioned a certain Andy Dufresne there, Zam, because of course that will play into, of course, later during the course of this podcast. But I totally agree with what both of you said about this wonderful character that is Hans Gruber, the amazing actor that was Alan Rickman, because to me, Hans is the reason the film's conflict feels so sharp, because he isn't built on brute force or chaos. He's built on control. And what makes him stand out immediately is his calmness. You know, even in high pressure situations, he rarely raises his voice or loses composure. And that steadiness gives him authority over the people around him. You know, he doesn't just lead through fear, but through intelligence and presentation. And he understands how to shape a situation so that others underestimate him until it's too late. And then there's also a kind of intellectual elegance to the way he operates. You know, he plans carefully, he anticipates responses and adapts when things shift. You know, he treats the entire situation almost like a structured exercise in problem solving. And that mindset makes him dangerous because he isn't improvising out of desperation. He's executing a plan with flexibility built in. At the same time, he's not purely a cold strategist. There's ego underneath it, as you guys were pointing out, and you can see that he enjoys control. He enjoys being the smartest person in the room, and he enjoys the performance of superiority. And that mix of calculation and arrogance is exactly what eventually creates cracks in his certainty. And the more he believes he's in command, the more exposed he becomes to unpredictability. And what also makes him effective as a counterpoint to John is how differently they approach problems. You know, one relies on structure, planning, and distance, and the other relies on improvisation, instinct, and physical persistence. And the film keeps putting those two mindsets against each other, and neither is shown as completely sufficient on its own. There's kind of an ideological layer to Hans as well. You know, he frames his actions in sophisticated language, presenting himself as rational and above emotional messiness. But that framing doesn't fully hold. You know, underneath it, there's greed and entitlement. The sophistication is real, but I think it's also a mask. And what I find most compelling is that he never feels like chaos. He feels like order pushed just slightly beyond morality. And that's part of why he's memorable. He doesn't disrupt the story by being unpredictable, like, say, a Joker. He disrupts it by being too controlled in a world that refuses to stay controlled. And by the end, I think what lingers isn't that he's defeated, but that he represents a very specific kind of intelligence. You know, one that can build a perfect plan and still fail because it assumes people and systems will behave cleanly. I think the film ultimately pits that against something messier and more human, and lets the tension between those two ways of thinking drive everything forward. So yes, a performance for the ages, a character for the ages, and an actor for the ages. So let's get to how this movie ended. As we were mentioning, you know, a weary and battered John finds Holly with Hans and his remaining henchmen. John seemingly surrenders to Hans and is about to be shot, but grabs his concealed service pistol taped to his back and uses his last two bullets to wound Hans and kill his accomplice. Hans crashes through the window, but grabs onto Holly's wristwatch and makes a last-ditch attempt to kill the pair. John unclasps the watch and Hans falls to his death. Outside, Carl ambushes John and Holly, only to be shot dead by Powell. Holly then punches Thornburg when he attempts to interview John. Argyle then crashes through the parking garage door in the limo and drives John and Holly away together. And thus is our ending. So, Zan, starting with you, what did you make of how Die Hard came to a close?
Yeah, if you don't think this is a Christmas movie, watch the credits. Let It Snow goes over the credits. I mean, come on. I love this ending, and we've talked about the ending throughout our conversation today. And, I've talked about Hans falling out the window. I've talked about the watch. I've talked about everything. But what I love about this ending is how incredibly emotional it is. Because not only do you have Holly's revenge on Thornburg, which we love, which is, we're like, yeah, do it, Holly. You have Powell's redemption. It's weird to think that he can find redemption in killing someone after his, personal prison of guilt came from killing someone. But the fact that he can do it at the right time and save someone at the right time, and that he can know and not panic and know what to do, is how you learn to live with a mistake. You learn to live with a mistake by not making that mistake again, and by using what you learned from that mistake for good and not evil. Whatever you've learned, you have to put it to the test. And he really does put it to the test. That, cops have service revolvers for a reason, and Carl is why. There is going to be somebody unrelenting at some point, and then it's going to be the only option. And it's a sad state of crime. And again, this is what we want cops to be doing, is this last resort type of thing. But not Carl, there's Carl the villain, and then there's Carl Winslow, and they're both in the same scene together. But Powell figures that out, and he learns what he needs to learn. And I love that we have Powell's redemption. Sorry, this movie makes me cry when I watch it. When Powell and McClane meet each other, it's like, this is all worth it. I just love that scene where they're looking at each other and they're like kind of side-eyeing each other. And Powell has this like kind of grin, and you can see McClane kind of mouth, ow, and just a little bit of a nod, and then they come together and they hug, and Bruce Willis makes that noise. It's so sweet. It's so amazing. And like every year at Christmas, I watch this and I'm like, oh, McClane and Powell, and they're going to be on the swings with Al Jr. It's going to be great. You're so happy for that. Like that meeting / reunion is so incredibly emotional. And what is so fantastic about this moment, and part of why it makes me cry, is because this is an action movie. And I've said throughout this conversation that action movies have this reputation of being, bros doing bro things and blowing shit up and shooting things and punching guys and, masculine and man stuff and man.
And then making out with the female lead by the end of the movie.
And then, yeah, kissing the girl and going and, riding off into the sunset with Grace Kelly. That's Gary Cooper, asshole. Anyway, how does this movie end? Our two bros hugging each other and crying because they're so happy to meet each other. They are so happy that they helped each other out of this situation, and they're so happy they're safe, and they're so happy they know each other, and they have become best friends over the last 6 hours. And even though they're best friends in trauma, and they probably aren't really going to see each other very much again, spoiler alert, they don't see each other very much again. This is an amazing emotional relationship, an emotional meeting / reunion. And it is not what you expect from a movie that's all bro, men. Like that, we expect an action movie to be like that scene in Barbie where Ken learns about patriarchy. And it's not. I mean, this is an incredibly emotional moment. And like I said, Bruce Willis is crying. This is our big, bad John McClane New York cop saves the day. He's ended this movie with bandages on his barefooted feet and he's crying. He's incredibly vulnerable. He's incredibly emotional. He has the moment where he's pretty much crying when he's kissing Holly, when he's hugging Holly because they meet each other. And then he meets Powell, and it's just nothing but emotion. And the fact that this movie has the emotional intelligence to portray that and to end this movie that way in such an emotional way with two guys hugging each other, like not bro hugs, not like one arm tap tap on the back with a fist. I mean full on real hug these guys. And they're both choking back tears. That's just beautiful. That's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant because at the end of the day, this is an emotional job. Emotions aren't bad. I said this to somebody recently, in response to, men saying that women are too emotional. Only showing rage as your only emotion is not a flex. Having emotional intelligence and being able to express emotion in appropriate ways at appropriate times, that's the flex. And these two guys have the flex of emotional intelligence. And that's something that John McClane probably didn't have before this evening. And, they're they've gone through so much and now they're able to, this is an appropriate reaction for a release to this kind of traumatic situation. And then they're crying, they're laughing, and then they break back from the hug, and then it's just, hey, this is my buddy. I want you to meet my old lady. This is my wife, Holly Gennaro, Holly McClane. And like I said, we have that moment where he's figured out what she needs, who she's trying to be, and she's figured out, what, some things are maybe more important than what a Japanese company thinks of my marriage. and and then he's like, you got yourself a good man there, Holly. Take care of him, which is exactly what bros say to their buddies' wives. So it's an adorable way of the two of them acknowledging that they both did something spectacular and they're both good people and they are both now better people for having known each other, and they will be better people on the outside of this situation once they get past this situation. So for me, the magic of this ending is Powell and McLean meeting for the first time and simultaneously having a reunion.
It is a beautiful moment, and and how much it subverts, like you were saying, Zan, what we would expect an action movie how an action movie to end. And funnily enough, of course, John McTiernan later would make fun of the action movie literally with Last Action Hero when it later down the line when it comes to his filmography. And Rachel, what did you make of how Die Hard came to a close?
Oh, it's a fantastic ending. It's an absolutely fantastic ending. I mean, the Hans falling is one of the most iconic moments of the entire movie. Yes, Alan Rickman was absolutely surprised. They told him they were gonna they got him all hooked up and everything, and they didn't want to rehearse it necessarily because they wanted they wanted the most genuine reaction, but they told him what to expect. They're like, yeah, we're gonna call action, we're gonna do this and that, and we're gonna count down, and then you're gonna fall. And they lied to him. Uh, what they told him they were gonna do and what they actually did were two different things. So yes, that's a one take genuine reaction, and yeah, I love it. It's so iconic. And you think, well, the leader, he's dead. So that's it. Movie's over. No, not quite. No, Al's gonna get a bit of a redemption. Uh, they get a chance to, you know, kind of make up for his previous mistake. Argyle gets to come busting out, like the hero, not realizing just, how much he actually helped. He's gonna have a hell of a story to tell his girlfriend. Um, and we get the reprise of one more bad guy. And Holly getting her well deserved punch in the nose. Uh, like I said, it's just line. A whole bunch of people need to be lined up, and we all just need to line up and just be like pow, 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 pow. And it's a great edit. You know, these people have just been through an extremely traumatic experience, and yeah, emotions are running high, but that doesn't mean that the emotions aren't real either. And there's some genuine affection there between John and Al. And yeah, is a relationship that's going to last the rest of their lives? Probably not. Even if anything, logistically, it's not going to work out. Um, but yeah, they probably send each other Christmas cards, more than likely. Um, and yeah, I love. I mean, John really needs to go to the hospital. That's probably like the least realistic thing. It's like they get in the limo and Argyle's just gonna drive them off to into the sunset. Like the John needs serious medical care desperately. You know, he's if if for anything else, the glass in his feet that needs to be taken care of. Um, yeah, as we've learned from yeah, Captain Phillips, among other things, glass and bare feet don't mix. If you're gonna do bad stuff, don't do it barefoot. Although even if you're not doing bad stuff, if you've seen the behind the scenes making of for Lord of the Rings, towards the end of or Fellowship, and Frodo's trying to leave by himself, and Sam goes running after him. Um, Sean Astin actually stepped on a piece of glass, like beach glass, and it was a big piece, and it went into his foot. It went through the Hobbit foot that he had on, which was just, you know, those are just, yeah, the same stuff they make other prosthetics out of, so it was not very thick. Um, and then went into his actual foot, and that was just a piece of glass, and they had to like helicopter him to the closest hospital to have that looked at. So it's like John needs some serious medical care. Once the adrenaline wears off, he is really going to be feeling it. Right now, the adrenaline and the elation that, you know, his wife is safe and everything, and all the bad guys have been taken care of. But the man needs stitches, some antibiotics, I'm sure, lots of fluids. Uh, Probably a full body X-ray and MRI. Um, but that's not really our problem. Yeah, it's not really our concern. Is yeah, the there's a lot of shit that will go down. Hopefully, yeah, some of our douchebags get what's coming to them. Unfortunately, then and now we know that that's not always the case. Uh, but I try not to think about that too much, otherwise it bums me out. So, but up until yeah, the credits start rolling, it's a fabulous ending. I love it that it's like, oh look, all the bad guys are dead. Nope, wait, just kidding. Oh look, there's Argyle. You know, he's come to join back. He's come to meet up with the rest of the party as well. It's like a D&D adventure, and people have been spread out, and now they're coming back together. Um, and yeah, it's I'm happy with the way this ends, and like I've never seen any of the other Die Hard movies. I have no desire to, because as far as I'm concerned, this ends, and I don't really care what happens after.
I'm with you, Rachel, in the sense I have not seen the other two, I believe, installments in the Die Hard franchise. And this, I think, works as a great standalone. But of course, if folks want to find out more what happened to John McClane, or the further adventures, I suppose, of John McClane, those movies are out there, of course. I agree. I mean, just like when we talked about My Cousin Vinny, I think the ending of Die Hard feels very satisfying in a very specific way, because it resolves both the action story and the emotional story at the same time without forcing either one to feel artificial. You know, on the action level, it works because everything has been stripped down to something personal and physical. You know, by the final stretch, there's no sense of spectacle left for its own sake. It becomes about exhaustion and improvisation and sheer persistence. And that fits the tone the film has been building from the start. Nothing is clean, nothing is easy, every step forward feels earned. And what stands out most is how the final confrontation with Hans avoids turning into a simple exchange of strength. It stays consistent with his character. He's still calculating, still trying to maintain control, even when the control is collapsing. And the resolution doesn't reward him for intelligence or planning. It rewards the unpredictability he failed to fully account for. And that feels thematically right for the film. On the emotional side, the ending between John and Holly lands, I think, because it doesn't pretend the relationship problems never existed. It doesn't reset them into a perfect couple. Instead, I think it acknowledges distance, tension, and ego, but still leaves room for connection. And that makes the reconciliation feel much more grounded than sentimental. And I also think that the final moments with Al are doing quiet work in the background. You know, Al isn't just part of the plot resolution, he represents the human thread that has been running through the entire crisis. The fact that he's the one who helps bridge the final gap, I think, gives the ending a sense of earned trust and not just victory. And what I like most overall is that the ending doesn't feel like it suddenly shifts tone to reward us, the audience. It stays consistent. You know, the same qualities that carried the story through uncertainty and stubbornness and improvisation and endurance are the ones that resolve it. Even the final release of tension feels gradual rather than explosive, which is rare for action movies of that era. I think it ends not with perfection, but with relief. And that feels right for a story that has always been more about surviving pressure than escaping it cleanly. So kudos to John McTiernan and, of course, his writers for doing such a great job when it came to how this movie ended. So let's see what the Academy made of this one. This film was nominated for 4 Academy Awards at the 61st Academy Awards. Best Visual Effects, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound Effect Editing, which all went to another movie you might have heard of, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Best Sound, which went to Bird. Now, Rachel, starting with you, should this film have won what it was up for? Why didn't it, and could it have been nominated for anything else?
Oh my goodness. I love Who Framed Roger Rabbit though. So I mean, this is fantastically edited. Like it does a good job of giving us action, but then dialing it back a little bit without it feeling like, can we get back to it already? Or just action, 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 never giving us a chance to breathe. Sound editing, I mean, when you're talking about a whole lot of Foley and special effect noises, explosions, guns firing, stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot here. I mean, it easily could just be just noise, but it's not. Thing is, though, is like, but it's, I mean, I hate to say that it's just an action movie, but there are certain things you just kind of expect from movies like this, and you get it, and it's done really, really well. Unlike something like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, where you're not dealing with sounds that actually exist. Because you're talking about when you get into the cartoon side of things, they don't exist in real life, therefore the sounds associated with them don't exist either. So you have to get really creative to give them sounds that you're like, yes, that is the sound I expect from a oversized cartoon shoe that is now being melted, in a giant vat of essentially acids. And then when you throw that in with the real world, things like the streetcars and at the bar and and Eddie's office and stuff, and then trying to get those sounds to make it work so that it sounds like it should, that it's not too working against each other. I mean, it's also edited really well too. I mean, you have to when you're trying to combine live action with animation. I mean, that's yeah, there's a reason it's not done that often, even now. Because making it look seamless so that, you know, the non-humanoid and the humanoid don't contrast too much with each other. So uh I think there could be a case for adaptation, but then again, Who Framed Roger Rabbit technically is an adaptation as well. Um, so goodness gracious. Oh, this is hard. I'm sure it's passed over probably because it is an action movie. Even though it does subvert some tropey things that had become kind of the norm and expected for action movies up to this point. Um, at the end of the day, this is, it's a summer popcorn flick, really, more than anything. Even though it's set at Christmas, it was released in July. Figure that out. Christmas in July. I yeah, I think that Alan Rickman probably deserved a nomination for supporting actor. I mean, he's absolutely fucking fantastic in this. Yeah. I mean, Bruce Willis, yeah, he's great. But I mean, Alan Rickman just absolutely steals this movie. Um, so I would fight for a nomination for him for best supporting actor easily. The soundtrack, the score, it's okay. I mean, it is Alan Menken, whom I love. May he rest in peace. Yeah, he's the reason that we got the first Metallica symphony concert.
It's Michael
Uh,
Kamen. It's Michael
oh, is
Kamen,
that
not
Michael
Menken.
Kamen? Oh, is it
Yep.
Michael Kamen? Yeah, Michael Kamen. That's who I'm thinking of. Um,
Kamen is just a spoonerism of Menken.
that really is. It's just both guys have done music to movies that have, stood the test of time and also been very important to me. So anyway, Michael Kamen, yes, may he rest in peace. Alan Menken, still with us. Thank goodness. But yeah, Michael Kamen. He is the reason we got the first Metallica symphony concert. um I'm tired. I had to get up at 6 a.m. this morning to take my dog to the vet. So it's been a long day. But the score, I mean, it's not something I mean, Ode to Joy, obviously, that's not original. But I mean, you're not going to find me humming the score to this movie, I don't think. So, um, yeah, I mean, it's not the type of movie that the Academy goes for. It's not their cup of tea. Um, but I mean, as far as film is concerned, this set a new bar for action movies going forward, and your leading action heroes, and villains, honestly. Um, but at the end of the day, it's a summer action flick, and it's not something the Academy really goes for, as opposed to something like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was something innovative. You know, the like I said, the combination of live action and animation, especially hand-drawn animation, is not something that is done very often. I mean, hand-drawn animation in general is not done very often, especially now. Um, so it was something different, it was something unique, it's a fun story. So I think in general the Academy, I think, got it right. um and I'm not necessarily mad at it. As much as I love this movie, I really love Who Framed Roger Rabbit too, but they're for completely different reasons.
Great point. And Zan, do you think that Die Hard should have received any of the statues it was nominated for, and could it have walked away with nominations in other categories, or even statues in other categories?
Nominations, definitely. I agree with Rachel about the score. Michael Kamen is great. Speaking of Alan Rickman, he did do Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. But when you think about the score to this
And that
movie,
score is a bit more memorable.
that is a bit more memorable, yes. when you think about the score to this movie, you think about the Ode to Joy. Those are the moments. Or even that ending piece where the money is falling, where it like kind of sounds like the Rite of Spring. But even after Let It Snow plays through the credits, what plays? The Ode to Joy chorus. And as the credits end, it the Ode to Joy ends. So that's kind of what you associate with this movie. So I wouldn't necessarily associate the score with it. As good as Michael Kamen is. Alan Rickman as Best Supporting Actor, I absolutely think could have gotten a nomination. Would I have taken it from Kevin Kline or River Phoenix? No. I love that Kevin Kline has it for this year for A Fish Called Wanda because he won for a comedy and an amazing comedic performance, by an actor who at the time was most famous for the Big Chill and Pirates of Penzance. We didn't really necessarily know his comedic chops at the time, and he really was wonderful. And the fact that that movie was honored with an Oscar for his comedic genius, and that is wonderful. After him, I love Alec Guinness, I love Martin Landau, I love Dean Stockwell. If I wasn't going to give it to Kevin Kline, I would give it to River Phoenix for Running on Empty. That movie is heart-wrenching, and River is so good in it. I might have taken, as much as I love Alec Guinness, his nomination for Little Dorrit was, I think, a time served nomination. So I might have taken him out and put Alan Rickman in. I think Alan Rickman, like I said, this man swaggered onto film screens and never left. It was incredibly impressive. Adapted screenplay. I could see this getting a nod for adapted screenplay, and I could see it being a major, major contender. I'm still probably giving it to Dangerous Liaisons though, because this is one where you find yourself like kind of you hate yourself after watching Dangerous Liaisons because of how much you're rooting for these shitty people to succeed in their bet. And that's incredibly impressive. Valmont is a horrible person, but you're laughing at him and you're like, oh, Valmont, you scamp. The way they did that is really, really, really impressive. So I probably still would have given it to Dangerous Liaisons. Any other year when it comes to sound effects editing, film editing, special effects, everything that it was nominated for, I would say, absolutely. I mean, because when you think about what else was up for it, I might even have given this a nod for cinematography because I love Jan de Bont, frankly. And even, it has some good makeup effects, but it's not Coming to America. It's not Scrooged, and it's not Beetlejuice, and Beetlejuice is what won. But the technical awards that it was up for, and for best sound, I get why Bird won, because Bird is a movie about Charlie Parker, and it's a movie about music. So I get why that one won. But like we said, every other category that Die Hard was nominated for, it lost to Roger Rabbit. And any other year, I think Die Hard would have been probably a shoo-in. Who Framed Roger Rabbit is magic. It is sheer magic. I just watched it this weekend, and it's incredible to think of the filmmaking feat that went into making that movie as believable as it is. This is something that, we could probably do on our computers right now. Just take some Photoshop and we could put Bugs Bunny into our home video. That is not something that could have happened in 1988. And, this deserves an Academy Award alone for the fact that heaven and earth was moved to the point where Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse were on the screen together. That's how magical this movie was. Roger Rabbit is just sheer magic. And there's no way anything could beat that. I mean, I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't win some other things it was up for. Like I said, I get Bird, but Who Framed Roger Rabbit is still pretty great with all of its, cartoon sound effects and everything. Art direction, again, Dangerous Liaisons is a gorgeous movie, but it's French Revolution. Look at a book. There's not a lot of, okay, I don't want to sound as dismissive as I sound when I talk about historical pictures, not being as much of a challenge, because they're still challenging. You still have to create worlds and costumes that go with the characters. But, what's up for this year is Dangerous Liaisons, Beaches, Rain Man, and Tucker. And what's interesting about Tucker, the art direction in Tucker, are the existing cars that Tucker created. Beaches, Rain Man, those are slice of life reality. All of that. Dangerous Liaison is also a slice of life of a reality. Who Framed Roger Rabbit created a world that we've all been imagining since we were children. So I'm actually shocked it didn't win art direction. So yeah, any other year I think it could have walked away with something, but not in a year with something like a Who Framed Roger Rabbit, because that movie is just magic. It's so incredible.
It's one of my favorite films. I do have a rather dark story when it comes to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but I will save it for a private conversation with my co-host. Sorry, listeners. That said, when it comes to this one, there is something interesting about how Die Hard was received at the time. Watching it now, it feels like a film that understands its craft so well that it almost disappears into itself. The editing is sharp without calling attention to itself. The sound design is detailed and spatially precise. And the structure is so carefully built that you only really notice it when you think back on it. It's the kind of work that feels effortless because it's controlled. And yet, when it comes to awards season, that same quality probably worked against it. Because the Academy tends to reward things it can see as innovation or prestige. To Rachel's point, a film like Who Framed Roger Rabbit had obvious technical breakthroughs, something that immediately signals history being made. A grounded action thriller, no matter how well executed, doesn't always read that way in the moment, even if the craft is just as demanding. And there's also, I think, the simple reality of genre. At the time, action films weren't really treated as serious awards contenders unless they were wrapped in prestige framing. This wasn't seen as a big Oscars film, even if it was operating at a very high level.
If it was a sword and sandal movie, maybe.
For sure. Had it been like a Gladiator or something of that nature, I definitely think so, Rachel, for sure. I mean, even its strongest qualities, its screenplay structure, its tension building, its character work were likely undervalued because they were working inside a genre the Academy wasn't ready to elevate. Are they ready to elevate it now? I don't know. It's easy, I think, also in hindsight to argue that it should have won for editing or sound, or at least been taken more seriously in writing or directing categories. I mean, the film is extremely precise in how it manages geography, escalation, and rhythm, and the soundscape does a lot of invisible storytelling work, making the space feel real and dangerous in a way that supports every moment of tension. To use a musical comparison, it's like a good bass line is good if you don't notice it. If it's not there, if you can hear it too much, it's doing too much. So that's the way I kind of see it from a musical perspective. But the truth is, the film wasn't ignored because it was weak. I think it was overlooked because its strengths were subtle rather than flashy. And because the industry at the time rewarded innovation, you could point to immediately rather than craftsmanship that held everything together quietly in the background. What I think makes it more interesting in retrospect is that its influence outgrew its recognition, as we've been saying throughout the course of this conversation. It helped define what modern action storytelling looks like, even if it didn't get fully credited for that in the moment. So the awards it didn't win, I think, say less about its quality and more about what kinds of films were visible to the Academy in that era. Hopefully certain genres will be more visible as we move forward. But I'm glad it got nominated, but I can see why it didn't win. So let's get to ratings then. Zan, what do you give Die Hard out of 10?
This gets a 9.5 for me. This is about as close to perfect as you can get. And like I said, when it comes to action movies, this is the standard by which I judge all other action movies. The amount of heart, the amount of deliberate choices, the amount of suspense, and the the juxtaposition of the comedic value versus the very real danger and the very gruesome violence. It just absolutely, again, understood the assignment. So yeah, this one gets a 9.5 for me.
Fantastic. Rachel, the one who selected today's film, what do you give this one out of 10?
Oh, I'm giving this one a 9. Sam said it's almost perfect. It is, I mean, the cast is spectacular. It's so well paced. It's got action, but it's also funny. I think that's partially why I like it. Obviously, Alan Rickman is a big draw, but I mean, there's stuff that Alan Rickman's been in where I'm like, yeah, I saw it once. I'm never really gonna necessarily see it again. Um, Even though the man's was absolutely fantastic, a fantastic actor. Um, because I don't like I don't like much like horror. I don't like my action when it takes itself too seriously. Uh, you know, I like it when there's a little bit of levity, and this has it. Which I think makes it more human, just because, finding humor, even if it's gallows humor, is a way that we humans try to handle very stressful situations sometimes. Um, it still looks great. The special effects still look fantastic all these years later. I think a lot of that is because they are practical and full scale. A lot of those explosions. So no green screening here. Bruce Willis walked away with some ringing ears, at least for a little bit after filming this. Um, so yeah, I mean, other than I think the fact that the score does not stand out, I think is really, but this was also early on in Michael Kamen's film career as far as doing scores as well, I think. So he would do some fantastic scores. Um, so but everybody's got to start somewhere. Not everything is going to be memorable. Even John Williams, I'm sure, has got some that, if you played it for me, I'd be like, what's this? So even the masters out there can't always make a score that's going to be stuck in your head for ages and ages and ages.
I totally agree with you. I'm with Zan on this one. I'm going to give this one a 9.5 out of 10. I mean, the reason it lands that high is how complete it feels in what it's trying to do. It's an action film, but it's built with unusually tight storytelling discipline. The structure is clean without being simple. Everything is set up and paid off in a way that feels intentional but not mechanical. The building isn't just a backdrop. It very much becomes a system the story moves through. And I think that gives the film a strong sense of place and logic. To your point, Rachel, the pacing is another major strength. It knows when to escalate and when to pull back. And the quieter moments aren't filler either. They're pressure build-up, and the balance is hard to get right, and the film rarely missteps. Then there's the central performance of John McClane. He's not written as invincible or polished. He's tired, improvising, and constantly reacting, and that makes the tension feel real because success never feels guaranteed. And on the opposite side, of course, Hans Gruber gives the story a kind of calm intelligence that makes every interaction sharper. The contrast between them keeps the film grounded even when the situation escalates into extremes. The supporting cast also matters, more than it usually does in action films. Characters like Al Powell, Holly Gennaro, they add emotional weight and keep the story from becoming purely mechanical. Even smaller roles help build the world in a way that feels lived in rather than functional. Where it loses that half point is mostly in how dated some of the action staging and effects feel by modern standards. And a few moments where characterization leans slightly functional rather than deep. But those are small issues in a film that is otherwise so tightly constructed. What I think keeps it also shy of a perfect 10 is less about flaws and more about ceiling. A 10 for me usually means something that feels not only excellent, but also formally transformative in a way that changes how I think about the film medium itself. Die Hard comes very close to that, and in the action genre, it arguably does reach it, but across all film, it sits just slightly below that threshold. Still, it is one of the most carefully built action films ever made, and one that keeps holding up because its strengths are structural and not decorative. So 9.5 out of 10 for me. So getting thus to gold standard feedback this week, we have some starting with the wonderful Frank Mendoza, who we haven't heard from in a while.
Mendoza!
Always great to hear from Frank. So Frank writes in, as I tried to squeeze myself out from between the 100 essays surrounding me on all sides to make my way to my device to send you my thoughts on Die Hard, I thought, now I know what a TV dinner feels like. Well played, Frank. This movie literally and figuratively achieves great dizzying heights. I've got a history of getting nauseous and discombobulated simply by looking down at the first floor of an open shopping area from the second floor. But I've gotten better with my fear of heights and even went zip lining with my daughter a few years ago. Congrats, man. All you heard going down the mountain was the sound of a little girl screaming all the way down. Truth be told, that little girl was me. No need to do it again, but never say never. So this first came to mind when I was pulling together this feedback on a Christmas classic with action sequences involving characters dangling precipitously from that damn skyscraper. It deserves its reputation for being as fun and as great as action thriller dark comedy concoctions can get. Bruce Willis has rarely been better with his wise arsery. Alexander Goodenough apparently gave up on aggressively pursuing Kelly McGinnis in Witness, and Shelley Long in The Money Pit to be a sleaze pursuing Bruce Willis instead. Hart Bochner abandoned Supergirl's Helen Slater to be a sleaze pursuing Body Bedelia instead. And Alan Rickman is just as sketch here as he is as Snape in the frequently Harry Potter films, Harry Potter films, pardon me, and as the music CD giving scumbucket that he is in the Christmas flick Love Actually. Seems he's cornered the market on the archetype of the Christmas sleaze. Sleaziness abounds in these characters, and that's what makes this cherished flick work. All of the actors seem to be having a whale of a time in their well-written roles, and the undignified send-offs that some of them get are properly satisfying. Any action film that includes the Breakfast Club principle and the Steve Urkel aversive Carl Winslow should get its flowers. So thank you for doing just that. The less said about the ill-conceived mid-90s parody Spy Hard with Leslie Nielsen that did not exactly put my sides in any danger of being split, the better.
Hey, but it has a really good theme song by Weird Al Yankovic.
I guess that it has that. Will be in the end. Moving on, we have, and so that's Frank's feedback for sure. I guess I don't know if I'm ever going to watch Spy Hard, but Rach, if you say it's got a good theme song, I might check it out. So moving on, we have more great feedback from Dave Proctor. So Zan, what does Dave have to say about Die Hard?
Well, before I get into Dave's feedback, I'm going to say, Nick, watch the opening titles of Spy Hard. If you've ever wanted to see Weird Al do the opening titles of a Bond movie, that will deliver completely. It's worth it to hear him do a James Bond theme, essentially. So Dave starts out with, hello, cinephiles. Hello, Dave. First thing, when you rewatch something the 900th time, seek something new. This movie is iconic and perennial. I found a chink in the timelessness this time. Gas prices. Regular 74.9 cents per gallon and unleaded 77.9 cents per gallon. I'm going to interject with Dave as I always do. Not only does the price date this movie, the fact that there's regular and unleaded gas also dates this movie. Dave goes on to say, everything else except age, fashion, computer tech, and so forth, this could be set now. I still disagree because bearer bonds, but they could be stealing something else. Anyway. Maybe an emergency dispatcher not taking a terrorist report seriously. Maybe. Christmas movie? Whatever, doesn't matter. This is a breakfast, lunch, dinner, anytime because you have to movie. There were certainly action movies before this and since. This not only launched a franchise and a career or two, but a subgenre. Maybe not officially, but anytime any similar story comes out, it gets called Die Hard in ellipses. For instance, I just rewatched Star Trek Next Generation that everyone calls Die Hard in Space. He said he watched one of those, but I don't know which one he's talking about. We'll have to ask our friends over at Undiscovered Podcast which one he means. It's been done and probably before, but I can't think of it right now. Bruce Willis. I wish him and his family peace. I cannot think of many conditions I wouldn't want to have than his, but he has a loving family that seems to be giving him everything they have. What more can be asked? He's absolutely right. What is going on with Bruce Willis medically is insidious and should not exist. He is, or back then, wasn't the first name or type you thought of as an action star. Not true from that day forward. He is one of the last stars you would say, I'm going to see the new Bruce Willis movie. There are a lot of stars in a lot of franchises. People talk about seeing the new Marvel, DC, Disney, or insert franchise or company here movies. Used to be you would say, I'm going to see the new John Wayne movie or Humphrey Bogart or Clint Eastwood movie. And Bruce Willis is here. How do I know? The last 5 years of his life, I watched several movies that all I knew was Bruce. His picture on a Blu-ray or thumbnail would get me to watch. Not many of those simply because of their talent. Did you watch Color and Night? I gotta know, Dave. You gotta tell me if you watch Color and Night. Anyone who knows me might ask about Jennifer Lawrence. I love her and will watch her read the phone book, but that's different. Almost everyone knows what I mean, and I'm not proud. I'm human. I digress. That's why I watch Michael Fassbender movies. Dave, I don't blame you. Alan Rickman. Cancer can eat a bowl of dicks. He was a treasure as well. And Nick, thank you for mentioning how horrible he was in Love Actually. That's why I hate Love Actually. I don't want to watch Emma Thompson cry at Christmas, okay? I don't need that in my life. Reginald VelJohnson. I know his TV show was a big deal, but it was just silly, and he was loved when he pops up in something. But it was just silly, and he was loved. But when he pops up in something else, I am happy. I just rewatched Crocodile Dundee. There he was. Bonus. I am not going to go deep on the movie. I predict you guys did just about 3 hours doing that. Fair. If allowed, I could talk about this movie all day and 3 more days on the sequels. I don't know if there has ever been a movie that can't be improved on, but this movie was a launching point. Not the only way to improve it is to copy it and correct its faults and edit and so on, but it has been tried and never achieved. Add in rewatchability, and this movie is in constant rotation. 10 out of 10 seems problematic. I can name movies that do things better here and there, and I can name movies that have made more money. Is it perfect? No. I rate this movie 15 out of 12. Shoes smaller than my sister's. This is one of those that makes picking your absolute favorite movie of all time impossible. It is on my Mount Rushmore, though. Great choice. Side note, I own this on DVD, but not Blu-ray or on a streaming app because it is never not available. Never. That says something. What else from the 80s is still around and still in use? Thanks, Dave Proctor.
Ooh,
yeah, I
nice.
could talk a lot about the sequels too. Mostly, I could talk about how I never liked Rennie Harlan from the beginning.
Very well said. And yes, well, yeah, and you have Frank to thank for the Love Actually there, Zan, and because
that was Frank. Yes, you were just reading Frank. That's right. I remembered your voice. Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. But you know, as I said, you know, once again shows Frank's sharpness, as of course Dave always very acute with his emails. So, of course, dear listeners, if you want to be like these terrific gentlemen and share your thoughts on the films we discuss here, you can do so by shooting an email to goldstandardoscars@gmail.com. Once again, goldstandardoscars@gmail.com. Feel free to follow us on our social media on X at Oscars Gold, Facebook as Gold Standard, the Oscars podcast, and of course, Blue Sky also at Oscars Gold. We love hearing from you guys, and we appreciate the follow and the support. Also, if you'd like to hear us discuss your favorite movies, you can join our wonderful family of patrons on Patreon and check out what we have going on there. Of course, you also get to unlock our previous reviews of such films previously selected by our wonderful patrons, such as recently Finding Neverland, Prey, Captain Phillips, Sense and Sensibility, and many more. So join our Golden Army. Head on over to patreon.com/goldstandardoscars. And a big thank you to our wonderful patrons for their support. Speaking of which, this month, our patrons have selected The Shawshank Redemption, speaking of movies that will make you cry, for us to review. And also, regardless of the platforms you're listening to this podcast on, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Pandora, etc., be sure to rate and review us, as that keeps the algorithm stimulated and allows a little show to reach more like-minded ears like yours. Tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell your pets. We don't care. Just spread the good word. Big thank you to those who have done so. Future thank you to those who will. So, Rachel, when you're not here discussing one of your all-time favorite movies, where can folks find you on the ever-vast interwebs?
You can find me with the Five-ish Fangirls podcast, or a weekly pop culture entertainment podcast where we talk about all sorts of geeky and nerdy topics from the female perspective, because fangirls are real fans too. We can be found pretty much wherever you find podcasts and at the fiveishfangirls.com, where you can connect with all of our podcast related social media accounts and our individual ones as well.
Fabuloso. And Zan, where can folks find you?
You can find me with our friend Charles Skaggs, who, by the way, just had a birthday. Happy birthday, Charles.
Happy birthday.
On our podcast, Drunk Cinema, where we watch our favorite movies over our favorite adult beverages and record our discussion for your entertainment. We've been on a bit of a break, but we are planning on recording tomorrow. I did get a shingles vaccine today, though, so we'll see how that goes. And if you want to find, that's found wherever podcasts are found. If you would like to find me on social media, I would love it if you would reach out. Your best bets to find me would be Instagram, TikTok, or Letterboxd. And on all three of those, my handle is Udinax19.
Definitely follow Zan and all her wild adventures indeed, folks. And of course, and everything else in between. When it comes to myself, you can find me at my day job, hosting the radio show Whiskey and Cigarettes, where we play the very best and nothing but the best of country music for you guys from Alabama to Bailey Zimmerman. For more information about the show and where to tune in, you can visit our website, which is whiskeyandcigarettesshow.com. Podcast-wise, you fans of those superhero movies, you can find myself and Keith Bliss on Happiness in Darkness, the superhero movie podcast, where we do discuss any and every superhero movie under the sun, and tangentially heroic as well. We recently reviewed Push, which I had never seen, starring, of course, Chris Evans and a very young Dakota Fanning, and was wonderful to see these actors. Speaking of which, coming up as we prepare for the upcoming, speaking of DC, Supergirl movie, we are going to be revisiting the OG Supergirl film, because of course Keith wasn't around yet when I reviewed it on Happiness and Darkness. So we'll see what I make of our revisitation of that particular film. And last but certainly not least, myself and recent birthday boy Charles Skaggs can be found on the Fandom Zone podcast, where we're currently reviewing Spider Noir, the first and so far only season of said show. We're having a great time doing that. And speaking of things to come on this show, next time as our wait for the 99th Best Picture to reveal itself continues, Beth Ann Gallagher will be making her return to the show, and the film she has picked is the 1989 Ulrike Oettinger film, Joanna Dark of Mongolia. So, Rachel and Zan, anything else you would like to add on our upcoming movie or anything else before we sign?
I should also say happy belated birthday to us.
Yes, indeed. Yes, the podcast has celebrated 6 years of activity. So well said there, Rachel. Yeah, and I was going to say, so anything else you guys would like to add on the Joanna Dark of Mongolia? I assume neither of you have seen it, like myself.
Nope, I can't say I have. So I may not be joining for that one, but I'd still probably like to watch it. So,
Zan, what about you? Our living Wikipedia of film. Have you ever seen this one?
I have not seen this one, and I'm hoping I'm able to find it easily. The interesting thing about the US is that it's a bit English centric, you know. We love movies from England and Australia, and we'll watch things in French and Japanese, but other European countries don't exactly get a lot of love for their movies, and so I'm always willing to, anxious to, broaden my horizons when it comes to movies of other countries. So I'm excited to watch this one.
And that's very much what Beth Ann does when it comes to her presence here. She always pushes the linguistic barriers. Last time we reviewed a movie in Finnish, of course, and this time a movie in German, amongst other languages. So, of course, dear listeners, we will see you next time with Joanna Dark of Mongolia and on Patreon with The Shawshank Redemption. Until then, enjoy those movies, keep that popcorn hot. Big thank you to David and Frank for writing in, and all round thank you all so much for the privilege of your time. Ciao. Marvel.